Chapter 294. Qing Zhan looked in the direction of the voice and looked over slowly. The next moment, she was in a trance. Why did she feel that this person was so familiar to her? Yun Biluo took a step forward, the dangling hair ornament on her head swayed. She looked at the little person sitting beside Hellion Vivian and smiled. Is this the seventh prince? Little Tiger Head pulled himself out from the world of ribs and said coldly, "Get lost." Yun Biluo was stunned for a moment, but she was not angry. Instead, the smile on her face grew wider. Hellion Vivian looked at her lazily with one hand behind her back. She looked like a loose ruffian. Yun Biluo did not know who in the Dragon War Empire could make Hellion Jiao willingly walk behind. Just like what Yuan Xiaoming said, this Yun Biluo was really interesting. Moreover, Hellion Jiao's complacent silence made Hellion Vivian raise her eyebrows playfully. Yun Biluo looked at the person beside her with a faint smile. Since the seventh prince does not welcome us, let's go somewhere else. As she spoke, she walked towards the pavilion and lowered her body. She said in a voice that only Hellion Vivian and the seventh prince could hear, "You're really my brother. You're exactly like His Highness." Little Tiger Head did not expect such a reply from Yun Biluo. He paused in the middle of chewing the ribs and looked up at Yun Biluo. Yun Biluo did not say anything more. She smiled and nodded at Hellion Vivian. The playfulness in Hellion Vivian's eyes deepened. She was not talking to Little Seven, but to her. So she was an old acquaintance of the royal family. No wonder he kept appearing in front of her again and again. Hellion Vivian supported her chin with her fingers and slowly rubbed the ribs. She gave Yun Biluo an unfathomable smile. Yun Biluo narrowed her eyes. She could keep her composure. She had underestimated this Hellion Vivian. Let's go. Yun Biluo finished her sentence with a smile. When she turned around, her eyes were emitting a faint cold light. Hellion Vivian ate her food as usual. The pain in her stomach made her feel even more lethargic. After separating from Little Tiger Head, she decided to go do her own things. In any case, the royal family didn't really need her to deal with the retired emperor, so she probably didn't need to go to Beligaju's place at night. Hellion Vivian yawned. Just as she was preparing to return home, she saw a flash in front of her eyes. Murong Changfeng, whom she hadn't seen for a long time, actually blocked her path. Let's have a chat. Murong Changfeng's voice was very low. When dealing with scumbags, Hellion Vivian would not show any mercy. I don't think there's any need for me to continue talking to you. Don't you want to know why the royal family married you? Murong Changfeng looked at her as she turned around to leave and suddenly raised his voice. Hellion Vivian was not interested at all and continued to walk forward. Murong Changfeng clenched his fists. Hellion Vivian, you don't really think that he likes you, do you? Hellion Vivian, use your brain and think carefully. What kind of man is he? What kind of woman can't he get if he wants? He married you only because the person he cares about is coming back, so he can use you as a shield. Otherwise, why didn't he know to help you guard against the four great families when he's so smart? He's just using you as a weapon. You can do whatever you want now, but when you're no longer useful to him, do you know what will happen to you? Not only will you be criticized by everyone, but you'll also lose your title as the third princess consort. If you're no longer the third princess consort, with your little profound heaven, how can you fight against the four great families? Not to mention others, even the third prince, do you think he will let a chess piece who knows too many of his secrets stay until the end? You know better than anyone why he sent so many shadows around you. Even I need time to get rid of those shadows. When the time comes, you won't be able to escape even if you have wings. No wonder there were no shadows behind her from the beginning. Not only the shadows, even Qing Zhan was nowhere to be found. Hellion Vivian stopped in her tracks. When she looked back, her eyes were filled with hostility. What does my situation have to do with you? Murong Chong Fong, I'm too lazy to care about you. Don't always come here looking for trouble. A warning made Murong Chong Fong angry. Everything he said was for the good of this woman, but this woman didn't know what was good for her at all. Good, very good. I'll take it that I'm meddling in other people's business. I'd like to see to what extent you'll be played like a monkey by the third prince. Murong Chong Fong flicked his sleeves and left. There was a strong sense of unwillingness on his face. Helene Vivian didn't even look at him. She continued to walk forward. She seemed to be at ease, but her eyes were a little low. She didn't know if it was because it was time, but the pain in her lower abdomen was more obvious. She really missed the brown sugar water of the 21st century. And those brothers in the Tang sect. Yuan Ming was silent for a long time before he spoke. Woman, no matter what, he was right about one thing. The heart of an emperor is unfathomable. I know. Helene Vivian's voice was as lazy and calm as usual. When I decided to cooperate with the royal family, I knew what kind of situation I would encounter. But there was one thing that was beyond my expectations. If he has someone in his heart, it's really not suitable for us to cooperate anymore. Yuan Ming didn't speak. Helene Vivian turned the umbrella that turned into a bracelet. Her eyes were faint, and there was a hint of mockery at the corner of her mouth. Indeed, it's better to rely on yourself than anyone else. Yuan Ming looked at her for a while before he said, Woman, don't forget that you still have the military seal and me. Helene Vivian smiled. Of course I didn't forget. I know very well what I'm doing. If I don't send Helene Guangyao to hell personally, my rebirth in this life would be in vain. It's great that you can think this way. Yuan Ming realized that he really didn't know how to comfort people. What followed was a period of speechless silence. However, at this moment, Qing Zhan was standing in front of Yun Biluo. There was a faint light in her eyes. If it wasn't because of what He Zhu said to her before, she might not have suspected anything. But now, this person, Qing Zhan's sight changed along with Yun Biluo. Yun Biluo seemed to have seen her a long time ago, but she didn't plan to do anything. She looked back at her with gentle eyes. Qing Zhan paused for a while before she took a step forward. She still retained the characteristics of a man of sacrifice. She wouldn't say much. Even if the other party was problematic, it was obviously not the right place to solve these problems. However, at this moment, Yun Biluo spoke with a smile in her voice. Since you recognized me, why didn't you come and say hello? Qing Zhan, I haven't seen you for so many years. You've grown so tall. You're really different from the little girl back then. Chapter 295. Qing Zhan's fingers stiffened. She then took a deep breath. Sister, is it really you? Yun Biluo smiled gently. If it's not me, who else could it be? I'm just a little surprised. Qing Zhan recovered from the initial shock. After all, we all thought you were gone at that time. Yun Biluo's gaze froze. Silly girl, I'm still fine. Qing Zhan glanced at her again. She did not know what to say. After all, after a long time, they would be unfamiliar with each other. Moreover, she had a taciturn personality. Yun Biluo seemed to know her very well. She smiled again. Come with me. Let's talk about how you guys have been all these years. Qing Zhan looked at the smile at the corner of her mouth and then looked at the setting sun. Not now. She added, I have to protect the princess consort. Yun Biluo's smiling face froze for a moment. However, she quickly raised the corner of her lips and automatically ignored the word princess consort. Oh yeah, I forgot to ask you. Why are you not with young Master Lai? Why are you here, sister? Qing Zhan suddenly interrupted Yun Biluo. For so many years, you never thought of coming back. Why do you want to come back now that His Highness is married? Yun Biluo's watery eyes immediately turned red. Qing Zhan, it's not that I don't want to come back. It's that the retired emperor will not allow me to appear. Sister, you don't have to explain so much to her. He Zhu, who was listening at the side, suddenly jumped out and looked at Qing Zhan with a cold smile. This girl has been bewitched by Hellion Vivian. She can't even differentiate between right and wrong. Yun Biluo looked extremely upset and shook her head at He Zhu. Qing Zhan did not want things to go to this point. However, she raised her head and looked at He Zhu. It's you who can't differentiate between right and wrong, not me. He Zhu, don't forget. His Highness is our master. As she spoke, she looked deeply at Yun Biluo. The tears of her former sister made her feel very uncomfortable. However, this incident was weird from the beginning to the end. She had to be careful. He Zhu, don't talk about little Qing like that. She has her own difficulties. Yun Biluo took a deep breath and coughed softly. When she looked at Qing Zhan again, she was already smiling like a pear blossom. Qing Zhan knew that since ancient times, benevolence and righteousness could not be fulfilled at the same time, so she left without hesitation. Sister, why are you being so nice to an ungrateful thing? He Zhu's voice was cold. It's a pity that sister still cares about her. She's just a white-eyed wolf. Yun Biluo did not say anything else. She just looked at Qing Zhan's departing figure and slowly narrowed her eyes. Of course, Qing Zhan heard the scolding behind her. Her fingers tightened on the long sword that she was wearing and then slowly loosened. What she was most worried about now was how to tell the Princess Consort about this. Does your Highness know that my sister is still alive? His Highness was also at White Academy now, and it was very likely that he would see his sister. If His Highness knew about this, how would he treat Princess Consort? Qing Zhan flinched at that moment. She didn't want to hurt the woman who had helped her when she thought she was in the abyss. The sun was setting in the west, and so was the twilight. Hellion Vivian, who was silent at first, stood up, as if she had sorted out her thoughts. She clapped her hands. All right, let's pack up. Let's go find the legendary old member. Really? Yuan Ming was really surprised. Haven't you been taking care of the child since the beginning? How could there be any news about the old member? Hellion Vivian raised her lips. Let me give you a question first. Let's say that there are 2 inns in front of you now, and there are guests in each of the inns. One day, a scholar woke up in the middle of the night to go to the toilet. He lit up the oil lamp, only to find that there was a person opposite him who was nailing another person to the wall with a nail. He was stunned. When he was about to lie down, he saw that the person who was holding the nail suddenly raised his head and looked in his direction. He pointed at him and said something with conviction. Guess what the person who was holding the nail was saying? What else could it be? He must be saying that the next one is you. As a demon, Yuan Ming was very confident in the answer he gave. Hellion Vivian lifted her eyelids. Wrong. Wrong? Yuan Ming didn't believe it. He had never been so curious about an answer. Then, what was the person holding the nail saying? Hellion Vivian raised her eyes. He was counting, muttering 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He was counting which room you lived in. When Yuan Ming heard this, his hair stood on end. Hellion Vivian continued, ordinary people will subconsciously think from the scholar's point of view. Under normal circumstances, the answer given would be the same as what you said. But the real murderer will directly act from the beginning. In the place where I used to live, the American FBI will give a few questions to test who is the serial killer. There are very few people who can answer more than 60% of the questions correctly, unless they are psychopaths. This method only tells us one thing. If we want to find the person, the first step is to think from the other person's point of view. That way, it will be more efficient. So, Yuanming forced himself to pull out his thoughts from that strange case. He raised his eyebrows. Who do you think the old member of the battle spirit forces is? Hellion Vivian smiled. First of all, I think this member won't be very old. According to the general undercover deployment, the leader can be an old man like Elder Huan. But the real member of the battle spirit forces, who can hide in the White Academy, must be a man in his 30s. This age not only means that his body is strong, but also that he can better carry out various activities. Moreover, his identity must be higher than Elder Huan's. This is the rule that any mercenary will follow. The higher the identity of the person, the deeper he will hide. Not only the people on the periphery, even the leader may not know his true identity. Moreover, the real battle power is usually concentrated in the 30s. Another point, if I am the person in charge of the battle spirit forces, in order to understand the qualifications of the students in the White Academy, I have already prepared my own fresh students. I must be a person who can check the information whenever I want to, and also be able to cover up the students who are carrying out the mission at any time. Only then can I maintain the mystery of the battle spirit forces. Thinking about it this way, having absolute power, not choosing a faction, and being able to move freely among the big families, there is only one person in the White Academy who meets these conditions. Chapter 296. White Academy's Headmaster, Tu Su Feng. Hellion Vivian's tone dropped, as if she had made the final decision. Yuanming stroked his chin. Woman, you must not let others hear these thoughts of yours. Be careful not to let others find out and treat you as an outsider, cutting the weeds and eliminating the roots. You don't need to tell me, I know. Hellion Vivian flicked the weed in her hand. We can leave now, but it's not time to find the headmaster yet. The most important thing is to think about how to make him admit it personally. Yuanming raised his eyebrows. Woman, I find that you're not the least bit flustered. If third prince is really like Murong Changfeng, won't you be sad? Hellion Vivian paused her footsteps and stood with her back to the light, her long hair slightly fluttering. When I was young, someone told me to not rely on others. That will make me vulnerable. Oh. Yuanming smiled. I like people who can say this kind of thing. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips and used his old words to stop him. Give up, there's no end to human-demon love. What's more, he's still a straight man, he won't be interested in you. Yuanming glared. Woman, you can't have an old lover behind third prince's back, right? Look at you, you're reluctant to part with him. What to do, you really guessed right. Hellion Wei Wei joked as she took a step forward and walked towards the inferior compound. Indeed, there was nothing wrong. She was just like this. In this world, no one could truly empathize with another person's pain. Your heart was pierced by thousands of arrows, you were in so much pain that you wished you were dead, it was only your own matter. Others may sympathize with you, may sigh, but they would never know to what extent your wound had festered to. Perhaps, there really was such a person. When your period came, he couldn't wait to take your place. But, regretfully, she had never met such a person. So, it didn't matter whether she was sad or not. This way, she could go into battle with a light pack in the midst of war. However, since she was on her period, she couldn't even pack lightly even if she wanted to. When Hellion Wei Wei returned to the inferior compound, she started to lie on the bed and pretend to be a corpse. She covered herself with a thick blanket. This was the scene that Qing Zhan saw when she came back. She quickly asked Hellion Vivian what happened. Hellion Vivian sat up with the quilt and waved her hand. Isn't it time for dinner? Yes, Qing Zhan looked at Hellion Vivian's pale face. I'll go look for His Highness. Hellion Vivian carelessly pulled the blanket closer to her chest and said, Your Highness is not a doctor. Why do you need him? Besides, it's not convenient for a doctor to treat my illness. At this time, the cafeteria must have run out of food. Come with me to the commerce courtyard and have a bowl of hot soup. Qing Zhan then retracted her leg and looked at Hellion Vivian's expression. Thinking about Yun Biluo, she could not help but feel a little absent-minded. So much so that she did not hear Hellion Vivian calling her 3 times in a row. Hellion Vivian reached out her hand helplessly and waved in front of her eyes. Qing Zhan was stunned. Princess. You've finally come back to your senses. Hellion Vivian pointed at the door frame in front of her. It's better to watch when you're walking to avoid the danger of disfigurement. Qing Zhan paused and replied, yes. Hellion Vivian yawned and looked at her slowly. If it's because of Miss Yun who suddenly appeared today that made you like this, you don't have to. Qing Zhan did not expect to hear the words Miss Yun from Hellion Vivian. She suddenly looked up and her eyes were fixed. Princess knew. What did she know? How much did she know? Qing Zhan had to admit that she was a little flustered at that moment. So, Princess, don't mind my sister. Sister is a thing of the past. Since His Highness chose you, he must have his reasons. Qing Zhan's voice was very calm. She tried to be calm, but in the end, it was obvious that she was not confident enough. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and smiled suddenly. It seems that you have a good relationship. Qing Zhan did not realize the meaning of that smile. She was only thinking about what to say to minimize the damage. We are all men of sacrifice who follow His Highness. When I entered the palace, my sister was already there. She was the one who followed His Highness the longest. As his personal maid, she took care of His Highness since he was young. She knew His Highness's way of doing things better than any of us. His Highness also. Qing Zhan paused and continued, His Highness also treated her well. It's just that a big fire destroyed everything. His Highness was seriously injured at that time. When he woke up, everything had changed. My sister was missing and His Highness lost his martial qi. He was unprecedentedly depressed. At that time, we all thought that my sister was dead. We didn't expect that she was still alive. The reason why she didn't come back was that the retired emperor didn't agree to the relationship between her and His Highness. He didn't want her to come back at all. Hellion Vivian said, oh, so she was a man of sacrifice. She even had such a relationship with Beligaju. Qing Zhan was stunned. Princess, you didn't know. I know now. Hellion Vivian looked at her with a smile. Qing Zhan, thank you. Your description is very concise and comprehensive. But just now, Princess. Qing Zhan stuttered a little. She felt that she was being tricked. She thought that Princess knew everything. Otherwise, why would she suddenly mention Miss Yun? Hellion Vivian was very innocent. I only guessed that you might know Miss Yun because the way you looked at her didn't seem right. As for the rest, I'll just take it as a romantic story. Romantic story. That's it. Qing Zhan looked up at Hellion Vivian's face from time to time. She found that there was no change in her expression at all. Suddenly, she was confused. Could it be that Hellion Vivian liked His Highness so much that she couldn't even notice the meaning in her words? The more it was like this, the more Qing Zhan felt that she had to say it out loud. Princess, my sister is different from others. She is the person that His Highness cares about the most. Hellion Wei interrupted her. So, who do you want to follow now? Are you going to look for her, or are you staying here? Qing Zhan was stunned again. Hellion Vivian moved her fingers. When the black feathers fell, it was the sky that opened up. She held an umbrella. Occasionally, 1 or 2 drops of rain fell down and fell on the dust beside her feet. It bloomed like a silent flower. She said, if this is a battle, go find her. You can be elegant and not have a trace of blood on your hands. You can be handsome and live a glorious life. You can't follow me because if you don't stand in that position, there will be people attacking you every minute and every second. I don't have 3 heads and 6 arms, so my hands are destined to be full of blood. But, Qingzhan, do you believe that I can give you a world that you have never seen before? Chapter 297. Qingzhan's eyes shook. Then, she slowly raised her head, her eyes were like torches. I will follow the princess. No matter who it was, after 100 years, they would just be a pile of bones in the mortal world. Then let's go and eat first. After Helian Weiwei finished speaking, she paused for a moment. After we finish eating, I'll introduce you to my little brother. You've seen too few men, that's why you like Nangong Lai's type. Qingzhan was speechless. It was really hard to continue this topic. Helian Vivian always treated her own people well. In the past, she was nice to her desk mate and gave them all the dishes. Now that it was Qingzhan, she ordered more than 10 dishes and a pork rib soup like a tycoon. She held the bowl and sipped the soup, she did not eat anything else. Qingzhan looked at the food on her small plate, then looked at Helian Weiwei's thin wrist. She felt a little sour in her heart. She paused for a while and scooped half a bowl of rice for Helian Weiwei. Helian Vivian ate whatever was fed to her. She even puffed up her cheeks when eating, like a furry little hamster. It was totally different from her usual appearance. The more Qingzhan looked at her, the cuter she felt her master was. She burst out laughing. Helian Vivian looked at her strangely and continued to stuff rice into her mouth. She was still eating. Qingzhan could not help but laugh. She picked up the bamboo chopsticks and ate. Helian Vivian was always a woman of her words. After pushing away the rice bowl, she asked someone to call Chen Yifeng and the rest out. They did not arrange to meet somewhere else. After all, men and women were not allowed to be alone in the White Academy. They decided to meet at the tea house in the commercial compound where people came and went. However, the tea house was unusually crowded today. Helian Vivian and Qingzhan just entered the tea house and saw Nangong Lai sitting opposite Yun Biluo. He rarely behaved and listened to something with his side face. Qingzhan paused and looked at Helian Vivian subconsciously. It was strange. At that moment, the pain in her heart lessened a lot. Her only worry was that young Master Lai would tell His Highness that her sister was still alive. But, what a coincidence. Before Qingzhan could speak, Yun Biluo saw them. She stood up slowly and smiled faintly. Qingzhan, why didn't you tell me that Lai is here too? Lai. Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows. Very few people dared to call themselves the prodigy priestess. Yuan Ming naturally heard her inner thoughts. It seems that this person really has quite a high position in the third prince's heart. Otherwise, a person like Nangong Lai would not tolerate her like this. It has nothing to do with us. Helian Vivian curled her thin lips. However, judging from her tone, it seems that she just found out that Nangong Lai is also in the academy. Yuan Xiaoming, help me think of an excuse to convince the dean. We have to pick up our pace. With the help of Nangong Lai, the prodigy priest, Yun Biluo will soon find Tusufeng. Yuan Ming smiled wickedly. I thought you weren't worried at all. Indeed, I am not in a hurry. Helian Vivian was still smiling faintly. But I am very competitive. If I can't join the battle spirit forces, the talisman in my hand will be useless. Yuan Ming did not understand. Why do you have to join the battle spirit forces? If you are looking for the hidden army, you can totally send the mercenaries you recruited to investigate for you. You think I didn't investigate anything? Helian Vivian narrowed her eyes. I decided to join the battle spirit forces because of the investigation. I always feel that the battle spirit forces might actually be the hidden army. Yuan Ming's eyes narrowed. Your third sister's letter clearly said that the hidden army and the battle spirit forces have different battle styles. How can they be the same? Don't forget what the battle spirit forces are best at. Hellion Vivian curled her lips. They are best at disguises. The strangest thing is that the battle spirit forces and the hidden army have one thing in common. They are afraid of being found out. Why? They are doing a good deed, why would they be found out? Other than protecting their members, the only other reason I can think of is that they are afraid of trouble. I have said before that one must think from the perspective of the other party. If I were to build an army and only use it for protection, it would be a pity for the founder to build an army. Moreover, the hidden army seems to be owned by the Hellion family. But if you think about it carefully, there is no such army that requires them to approve of the other party before they can take over the army. In other words, they don't belong to anyone at all. They are choosing a successor. According to my argument now, the military talisman in my hand is the only chance for me to get closer to the truth. After I join the battle spirit forces, I will have the opportunity to really interact with them. I will complete what my mother did not complete. Even Yuan Ming, who was in the demon land, could not help but admire Hellion Vivian's intelligence after hearing this. There were very few women in this world who could achieve such a feat in reality. Qing Zhan looked at Yun Biluo and did not know what to say. Fortunately, at this moment, someone at another table stood up with a smile and waved at Hellion Vivian. "Boss, over here, over here." It was Chen Yifeng. He smiled like the sun and had a very bright personality. Hellion Vivian nodded at him. Usually, at this time, they would have a jar of new hong. Today, they could only drink hot tea and not wine. This is Qing Zhan. Hellion Vivian was very dignified when she ordered her underlings. This is Chen Yifeng, General Chen's son. This was the first time Chen Yifeng had seen a woman in his team. His father and grandfather were all generals, so he would get nervous whenever he saw a woman. Once he got nervous, he would jump out and say, "Hey, take a seat, take a seat." Qing Zhan had never seen a man like this before. That kind of warmth made people let down their guard easily. No wonder he was the princess's friend. Hellion Vivian put one hand on the back of the chair and looked at both of them with a smile. Then, she asked Chen Yifeng, "How's the martial practice that I gave you last time?" "Father and grandfather praised me, and..." Chen Yifeng always felt uncomfortable with a woman around. After all, she was not the boss. She was a real soft girl. The retired emperor even promoted me. Hellion Wei Wei took a sip of the hot tea and said, "That's good. Qing Zhan is younger than all of you. You've seen how thin she is. You know what to do when I'm not in the academy." "Yes, yes, yes. Don't worry, boss." Chen Yifeng was good at this. He smiled like the sun. "She is indeed too thin. I don't know what these women are thinking. They always think that they are fat. Let me take care of her in the future. I promise I will take good care of her." Chen Yifeng was an uncouth man. Usually, no man would say such things. He just had to say it out loud. On the other side, Yun Biluo saw it and laughed. What is she doing? Is she looking for a husband for Sister Qing Zhan? After that, she looked at Nangong Lai. Chapter 298. Yun Biluo thought that he would follow her lead and smile nonchalantly. She didn't expect that Nangong Lai's devilishly handsome face would look even colder than before. Yun Biluo was surprised, but before she could speak, Nangong Lai stood up. Nangong Lai stood up and smiled wickedly. "Didn't you say you wanted to play a song? Where's the song?" There was no coldness in his smiling eyes. All that was left was his usual carefreeness, so much so that Yun Biluo thought she had seen wrongly. Hei Zhu sat aside with a cup of tea in her hand. Sister Yun, please play another song, so that others can see where she is lacking. As she spoke, Hei Zhu looked at the people at Hellion Vivian's table. Hellion Vivian pressed on her belly and lowered her head to rub it. Her eyes were indifferent, as if she had never taken anyone seriously. This was what made Hei Zhu angry. The saying that ugly people were more troublesome was true. Sister. Hei Zhu smiled at Yun Biluo. It seems that some people don't even look at you. You're right. With her looks, she doesn't dare to look at you. The difference is like heaven and earth. Yun Biluo did not speak. She only curved her lips and asked Nangong Lai beside her, which song does Lai want to hear? Sister, it's too monotonous for you to sing alone. Hei Zhu's eyes flashed and fell on Hellion Vivian again. I heard that sister and the Princess Consort have a bet. Why don't we compete in advance to see who is better? Her sister had been with His Highness since she was young. She was naturally familiar with the four arts. However, that ugly woman could not even write properly, let alone sing. This time, she must slap this ugly woman in the face. Let her properly understand what kind of identity she had. I think it's fine. Hellion Jiaoer, who had been silent all this while, took the lead and chuckled, we're all here, it's fair. Hellion Vivian smiled. She had not agreed yet, but this group of people had decided on their own. What was the point of talking about fairness? Hellion Jiaoer knew better than anyone else whether she had learned the piano or not. In his memory, this body had also leaned against the window, wanting to secretly learn something. At that time, she was still young, no more than 10 years old. However, before she could attend the next class, she was cornered by the Hellion Jiaoer. They made her bark like a dog, and if she didn't, they would strip her naked. Hellion Vivian didn't scream. She was severely beaten and never came back to Shuachin's courtyard again. She used both hands to wield a long saber, a short sword, and a submachine gun to sweep both the black and white sides. Yet, she couldn't even play a xylophone. Did someone grab hold of her weakness and want to teach her a lesson? Hellion Vivian turned the teacup in her hand and smiled. Qing Zhan also felt that this was obviously bullying. She clenched her left hand and glanced at Hei Zhu. Hei Zhu, aren't you afraid that His Highness will get angry and take your life? Why would His Highness get angry? Hei Zhu looked at Qing Zhan amusedly. Sister just wants to compete with the princess. Besides, His Highness has always liked to listen to sister play music. If His Highness was here, he would be happier than anyone else. Qing Zhan, why do you have such a big reaction? You don't have to attract Master Lai's attention like this. At this point, everyone could hear the sarcasm in her words. Bursts of laughter sounded from the tea house. Qing Zhan's face turned pale, but she didn't have any intention to retreat. She stood in front of Hellion Vivian, but before she could speak, Hellion Vivian suddenly stood up, crossed the wooden stool, and smiled at Hei Zhu. She didn't hide her magic. The mole under her eyes was particularly clear when she smiled. The half-exposed white teeth at the corner of her mouth made her expression very difficult to guess. Isn't this a bet? What is the bet? Not knowing if it was because the contrast was too big, Hei Zhu was a little confused and said, bet? It's okay if you don't know, but Hellion Vivian reached out to the side of the vertical guqin. Her movements were simple and neat. She plucked the strings of the guqin one by one. She then turned her head, squinted her eyes at Hei Zhu, and said slowly, if you don't know, then get out of my way. Don't be an eyesore. Hei Zhu heard this and straightened her neck. Her temper was as expected, she would explode at the slightest provocation. But before she could speak, Yun Biluo held her hand and smiled at Hellion Vivian. How about this, if I win, you give up your seat. If I lose, I will tell you all the information and clues this time. Give up my seat. Hellion Vivian repeated these two words playfully. She raised her eyes and looked at Nangong Lai. Is this your idea? Or their idea? After all, Nangong Lai could still speak on behalf of the third prince sometimes. Nangong Lai frowned and looked back at Yun Biluo. Then, he said to Hellion Vivian, this has nothing to do with me. I just want to listen to the music. Is that so? Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes as if she was thinking about something. He Zhu sneered, sister, why are you betting with her? As long as His Highness sees you, do you still need her to give up her seat? His Highness will definitely divorce her. Hearing this, Hellion Wei curled her lips into a smile. She raised her eyes and met Yun Biluo's gaze. I'll bet with you. However, this bet is a little too small. If I lose, I can give up my position. It's just a title, you can take it if you want it. As for if I win, He Zhu's tongue will be cut off to compensate me. What do you think? Miss Yun, do you want to bet? Hearing this, He Zhu suddenly looked at Yun Biluo. Yun Biluo remained silent, as if she was weighing the pros and cons. He Zhu did not believe in evil. She said in a strange tone, sister, since the princess consort has said so, then let's bet. It's a good opportunity for everyone to enjoy. After all, sister's music is different from ordinary people's. It's rare for people to have the opportunity to listen to it. All right. As if she had made an important decision, Yun Biluo smiled at Hellion Vivian as if she was considerate of her. Miss Hellion Vivian, you probably haven't prepared anything yet. Shall I go first? Hellion Wei glanced at Yun Biluo with a cold smile on her face. Qing Zhan was still worried about Hellion Vivian because she was also a death attendant. She knew better than anyone how powerful Yun Biluo was. As Yun Biluo spoke, she reached out her hand and let the servant girl pass her pipe. Her slender fingers just touched the strings of the pipe. The tinkling sound of the pipe was like the spring water flowing between the stones, gliding slowly past the ears. It was indescribably comfortable. Her voice was also very pleasant. Every frown, every smile, every note and every tune were played exquisitely. When the same song was sung by her, it was gentle and pleasing to the ears. Chapter 299. The people in the tea house were already mesmerized by the music. When the song ended, Yun Biluo stood up gently. Her figure was like a willow and her beauty won a round of applause. The more Chen Yixiong listened, the more he felt that their boss was dangerous. He glanced at Hellion Vivian worriedly. Their boss was good at assembling armaments, but when it came to singing, it was hard for him to imagine how his boss would sound like when she sang. Wouldn't it scare people away? He Zhu glanced at Hellion Vivian with a smug look on her face. She said to Yun Biluo, sister, your guqin skills are getting better and better. I'm afraid no one will dare to play guqin and sing in front of you in the future. Yun Biluo smiled. He Zhu, that's enough. You're praising me too much. I'm telling the truth. You can ask Master Lai if you don't believe me. He Zhu looked at Nangong Lai. He's a person who knows how to appreciate guqin. Nangong Lai was, of course, a person who knew how to appreciate guqin. However, the current situation made his thin lips cold. Yun Biluo was afraid that he would think too much, so she quickly pulled He Zhu back. She looked at Hellion Vivian with rippling eyes. Miss Hellion Vivian, it's your turn. He Zhu did not say anything, but she acted as if they had already won. Hellion Vivian did not look at her. She picked up the guqin but did not play it. Instead, she flipped it with one hand so that one end of the guqin was on the ground and the other end was upright. It was just enough for her to hold it in her hand. No way, she doesn't even know how to hold the guqin. just when everyone was laughing involuntarily at Helian Wei Wei's actions. Suddenly, a low and deep voice came out from his throat. The wind brightens the snowflakes. The wind whitens our hair. We said we would conquer the world together. Do you still remember? It was midsummer that year. Our wish was infinitely big. Hand in hand, we became a boat. Across the river of sorrow. Helian Wei Wei's voice had always been deeper than other women's, and now that she was on her period, her voice was slightly hoarse. It was almost from the first sentence that she spoke. It caught everyone's ears. Not to mention others, even Nangong Lai's eyes flashed with a trace of amazement. That kind of melody, that kind of singing voice, had never been heard before. At this moment, a flute suddenly sounded from upstairs. It was actually a song that was sung by Helian Vivian. Helian Vivian paused for a moment. She looked upstairs and her eyes met with a pair of twinkling eyes. She saw that Jing Wushuang was looking at her gently. His ivory-white clothes outlined his figure even more elegantly. He looked like a person who had walked out of an ink painting. Occasionally, when the wind blew, he would brush it away with a smile. His movements were slow and elegant. He was so handsome that it could make people in the world suffocate. The sound of Jing Wushuang's flute was not as simple as it sounded pleasing to the ears. The sound of the flute carried a gentle inner force, as steady as flowing water. It seemed to be able to soothe the restlessness and uneasiness in one's heart, and it had a warm and gentle power. Helian Vivian smiled. Her voice became deeper and more pleasing to the ears. It was as if it had been moisturized and blended with the beautiful flute sound. She looked at the people who were listening to the song. Her eyes were shining like a singer who was telling a heartbreaking story. We agreed not to separate. We will always be together. Even if we are enemies with time. Even if we are against the whole world. Innocent time cannot be bullied. Youth is absurd, I will not let you down. Snow begs you not to erase the traces of us being together. When the song fell, the flute sound stopped. The tea house was silent. Chen Yifeng was really dumbfounded. Only when Helian Vivian put down the zither and walked to his side did he react. He blurted out, "This song is too damn good to listen to." It was as if he had triggered a mechanism. When his words fell, the audience was in an uproar. Everyone surrounded Helian Vivian and asked her questions. They couldn't wait for her to sing one more song. Helian Vivian rubbed her stomach and laughed, "Hey, I'm still in the competition. Let me pass first." Oh. Only then did the students open up a path for her. However, with just this one song, Helian Wei Wei had already made a qualitative leap in their hearts. Even the girls from the superior compound couldn't help but think of Helian Vivian's previous experience because of her song. Thinking about it carefully, she was the one who was betrayed. Obviously, it was Prince Murong's family who heartlessly divorced her. But in the end, the one who was scolded as a love-struck fool was her. Now, she was finally married to the third prince, but it was still not satisfactory. Because everyone knew why the third prince had married her. They were all girls. They all wanted to have someone who would never leave them. However, no one dared to say and do as Helian Vivian did. In fact, they were the group of cowards. They didn't deserve to laugh at this ugly girl who was tougher than anyone else. Helian Vivian didn't know what these people were thinking. The reason why she agreed to the bet was very simple. It was to avenge Qing Zhan. So, as she was determined to get He Zhu's tongue. Let's vote. Let's decide by the number of people who clap. Helian Wei Wei curved her thin lips and said lazily, "If you think I sang well, why don't you start clapping now? Well, those who clap will get silver." When the people heard the last sentence, they laughed first and then applauded. In the middle, there were also cheers. Third Princess Consort, you sang really well. Even without the silver, you sang well. Thank you. In the face of such praise, Hellion Vivian didn't feel pretentious at all. She smiled handsomely. Your taste is really good. Calm but not cold-hearted, indifferent but humorous. These words were perfect to describe Hellion Vivian. So, after the speech, there were a few more people who clapped. For the song, and also for Hellion Vivian. The winner was obvious. When it was Yun Biluo's turn, there were only 7 or 8 sounds. They were the people who followed Hellion Jiaoer. He Zhu's face turned pale in an instant. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. She spun a dagger in her palm. At this moment, she was like a demon, pressing every inch. Do you want to do it yourself, or do you want me to help you? He Zhu saw her coming and clenched her hands. It looked like she was going to do it. Of course, Yun Biluo wouldn't let her do it. If something happened, her whereabouts would be exposed. How could she be willing to be taken away by the retired emperor again without even seeing him? Thinking about it, she reached out and stopped He Zhu's movement. She looked at Qingzhan. Qingzhan, you have always been close to He Zhu. If she loses her tongue, the rest of her life. There were feelings among the death servants. It was because they had gone through too much training that those who stayed in the end were few and far between. In their hearts, other than protecting their master, they usually stayed together with the few of them. It could be said that they had gone through thick and thin together. Yun Biluo dragged Qingzhan into this at this moment to make things difficult for her. Chapter 300. The reason was simple. At this moment, if Qingzhan did not plead for mercy, someone would definitely say that she was ungrateful. If Qingzhan pleaded for mercy, this matter would definitely leave a knot in Hellion Vivian's heart. Some things are easier to do when the master and servant are not on good terms. Qingzhan paused and looked at Yun Biluo in disbelief. It was as if in her heart, the person who was like a sister would not make things difficult for her with this kind of problem. However, it was obvious that she was wrong. Humans were capable of doing anything for the sake of their own interests. Perhaps it was because she stood on the side of the princess that she became the target of the other party's attack. However, Qingzhan did not regret it. She looked up and was about to speak. However, Hellion Vivian continued, Miss Yun, Qingzhan is a soft-hearted girl, but since she is with me, she is my person. I have a principle, which is to protect my own people. You said that Qingzhan and He Zhu have a good relationship, then I would like to ask. He Zhu has been joking about Qingzhan's previous feelings since just now. You asked about the rest of He Zhu's life. What about the rest of my Qingzhan's life? A woman cares about nothing more than her reputation. Did He Zhu's mouth leave any face for Qingzhan? Or are you saying that you can't afford to lose? Yun Biluo's curved eyes froze. She slowly clenched her fists and exerted all her strength. However, her expression was still as gentle as before. Her eyes were red with grievance. Of course not. Miss Weiwei, you've misunderstood me. Then accept your loss, Hellion Vivian said as she put her hand on Qingzhan's shoulder, and, young Master Lai. Hellion Vivian said the 3 words young Master Lai very lazily but with a sense of coldness. I think you must have misunderstood something before. She smiled at Nangong Lai. My Qingzhan is too young and is easily soft-hearted. Sometimes, she can't even tell what is like and dislike. Moreover, even if she likes, she knows when to stop and let go. No matter what, to treat someone who used to take care of you so much, you just watch her be mocked like this. Master Lai, I have to say, you really think too highly of yourself. Do you really think that you can make people never get tired of eating you? Nangong Lai suddenly raised his head. He wanted to explain, but he saw that Qing Zhan's eyes were not on him since the beginning. His heart began to sink slowly. It was the first time in his life that he felt so irritated. He wanted to scold someone. Helene Vivian curved her thin lips slightly and reached out to pinch Qing Zhan's face. "All right, you don't have to make such a difficult choice. If I want something, who else can make it difficult for me?" As soon as she finished speaking, no one saw how she moved. He only felt a cool breeze blow past. Helene Vivian arrived in front of He Zhu. After all, He Zhu was a death warrior. Naturally, she sensed the danger. She wanted to reach out to block it, but it was too late. Helene Vivian looked at her and smiled wickedly. First, he gave her 3 hard slaps. Paw! He had used a lot of strength in the last slap. He Zhu's entire face tilted to one side. He Zhu had never been hit by anyone like this before. There was blood on her mouth. Helene Vivian said faintly, "These 3 slaps are for Qing Zhan." "He Zhu, do you think that everyone wants to be a concubine like you?" As if her thoughts were exposed, He Zhu's expression changed. What did you say? How much do you want to be a concubine for Baligaju? That's why you do so many disgusting things." Helene Vivian finished this sentence and moved the dagger. When He Zhu wanted to speak again, her mouth was already full of blood. The pain made her scream in an instant. Helene Vivian acted as if he did not hear it and retracted his hand. Yun Biluo did not expect that He Zhu would attack without warning. Not only that, she was so ruthless. She caught He Zhu in one go. Looking at the blood gushing out of her body, she quickly stuffed a pill into her mouth. Helene Vivian did not care about them at all. She glanced at a few students from the superior compound who gasped. Helene Zhao was one of them. "How many times have I told you? I'm not the useless person I used to be. You just don't listen and keep coming to me." Chenny Feng. "Yes. Boss, I'm here. I'm here." Chenny Feng came over excitedly. "Who do you want to beat? Just say it." Helene Vivian knocked on his head. "Can beating people solve the problem? We are cultured people. Don't always fight and kill." Chenny Feng thought. Then who was the one who was fighting and killing just now? "I'll listen to boss's instructions." His old man said to follow their boss. She was a powerful woman. Helene Vivian spoke in a calm tone. It was because it was so calm that it made people's scalps tingle. "Find out which families they are from. Organize the information and hand it to the dean. Tell him that they are suspected of bullying their classmates. Violence is not allowed in the academy." "Yes." Chenny Feng lowered his eyes and thought to himself. His boss's skill of beating people up was getting better and better. Although those people really liked to get together and laugh at others, where did the term violence in the academy come from? After Helene Vivian dealt with them, she did not care about the expressions of Yun Biluo and the others, including Nangong Lai. She lifted her long legs and walked toward the 2nd floor. As she walked, she wanted to tie up her long hair. Unfortunately, when she was beating people up just now, just as she was thinking, suddenly, a pair of jade-like hands extended in front of Helene Weiwei's eyes, carrying a light medicinal fragrance, holding a simple and unadorned hairpin, revealing a calmness that made people feel at ease. "Here." Helene Vivian raised her head and saw Jing Wushuang's deep black eyes. She raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Why is it with you?" Jing Wushuang smiled but did not say anything. Her hand that was holding the hairpin reached out to her, signaling her to tie up her hair. Helene Vivian took it and tied up her hair. She looked calm, as if the person who was angry just now was not her. There was a hint of laziness in her elegance. Jing Wushuang nodded in satisfaction when she saw that the woman had tied up her hair again. Her lips were still smiling lightly. "This suits you better." That's why I'm a gentle person. Hellion Vivian smiled handsomely. The alienation in her eyes gradually disappeared. Thanks for just now. You played the flute very well. That's because you sang well. Jing Wushuang smiled and coughed lightly. This is the first time I've heard such a song. Even if I'm against time, even if I'm against the whole world, the only thing I want in life is to have a confidant. The corner of Hellion Wei Wei's mouth slightly curved. If young Master Wushuang opens his mouth, countless female confidants will follow one after another. Me? Jing Wushuang looked at Hellion Vivian's black eyes. The curve of her eyes was especially gentle. Forget about me. Do you want to have a cup of tea before you leave? I happen to have a martial arts practitioner here that I can't figure out. Chapter 301. Hellion Wei Wei agreed and left the rest of the matters to Chen Yifeng to deal with. Qing Zhan originally wanted to be the assistant and help Chen Yifeng, but when she took a step forward, her arm was grabbed by someone. Nangong Lai didn't seem to give her any chance to break free. He pulled her over and strode out of the door. Hey, you! Chen Yifeng wanted to pull him back. Nangong Lai looked at him coldly. This is none of your business, get lost. The prodigy priest also had his temper. As the successor of the entire Dragon War Empire, when Nangong Lai tore apart his unruly nature, there was a coldness that was more domineering than anyone else. Chen Yifeng knew him. He used to be in the same team as their boss, and they were both from the inferior compound. They seemed to have a good relationship. Today. To be honest, Chen Yifeng was a little confused. Qing Zhan did not break free. She knew the young master that she had served for almost 10 years better than anyone else. She only raised her eyes slightly and said calmly, Young Master Lai, if there's anything, just say it here. Yifeng and I still have things to do. Yifeng. Nangong Lai looked back and his tone was so cold that it was not like him. You call me that so intimately. Why? Now that you have changed your master, the person you like has also changed, right? Qing Zhan pulled her hand back as if she was stating a fact. Young Master Lai, you know that I have already changed my master. I am a servant will naturally be loyal to the current master. I hope young Master Lai will not make things difficult for me. Listening to the word servant girl beside his ear, Nangong Lai only felt that it was harsh to the ears. He took a deep breath and slowed down his tone. If I said that I came here today by coincidence, and that I didn't think that they would say those words to you, would you believe me? I believe you. 2 words, but the answer was too fast, which made Nangong Lai feel that something was not right. Young Master Lai, is there anything else? If not, we will go back to work. Qing Zhan stood there with her back straight. She thought that there had never been a day when her back was so straight. If it wasn't for the Princess Consort today, she might never experience this feeling. She had really liked a person for too long, so long that she was extremely humble. That was why she had been poked in the soft spot so many times that she even forgot to hold her head high. Nangong Lai looked at the girl in front of him as she slowly walked towards another person. Then, the two of them compensated the tea house for the loss. The people who were watching the fun just now had become a little frightened. Yun Biluo sat on the ground with He Zhu in her arms. Her face was filled with tears. Nangong Lai was a person who rarely regretted, but today, he regretted coming to this tea house. Of course, he would not let those who mocked her off so easily. He just wanted her to know the disadvantages of not having him. But, bang! Nangong Lai seemed to be at the end of his patience. He kicked away the wooden stool beside him and walked out of the tea house. He was afraid that if he stayed any longer, he would not be able to control himself and make a move. Based on the current situation, any random person was more important than him in her heart. She was so reckless because she thought that he would not do anything to her. Obviously, she was the one who drugged him, but in the end, he was the one who was wrong. Nangong Lai thought for a while and went back. But this time, he still looked as evil as before. He leaned his body and whispered in Qing Zhan's ear, "Even if you don't care about yourself, you should think about the end of your princess consort and this Qin Yifeng beside you. If you want the Qin family to lose their position in the officialdom, you should continue to stay here." After that, he smiled and left with a flick of his sleeve. This time, Qing Zhan could only bite her lips and follow him. In a corner where no one was around, Nangong Lai did not look very happy. There was a unique coldness in his smile. "It seems that you are really good to him." Qing Zhan's eyes were half closed. "What should I do to appease your anger?" "You want me to appease my anger?" Nangong Lai's voice was faint. "Then tell Helly and Vivian that you want to come back." Qing Zhan suddenly raised her head and frowned. "Go back? Didn't you not want to see me?" "I have changed my mind again." Nangong Lai stretched out his hand and pressed Qing Zhan against the wall. "Of course I have to keep the person who drugged me by my side and teach her a lesson. What do you think?" Qing Zhan knew what he meant by teaching her a lesson. Her eyes dimmed and she looked directly at the face that she had liked for so many years. "Other than asking me to go back, what can you do to appease your anger?" "You." Nangong Lai felt a sudden pain in his chest. Then, he smiled charmingly. "Qing Zhan, do you really want to do something with that Qin Yifeng?" Qing Zhan's eyes were calm. "Young Master Lai, you know that I have wanted to have a family since I was young. Qin Yifeng is a good person. He works for the princess consort. It is easy to be with him. But I understand what young Master Lai wants to say. I am no longer a virgin and I am not good enough for him." "You mean to say that if you were a virgin, you would want to marry him?" Nangong Lai's smile was even wider, but the coldness was more frightening than the evilness. "Qing Zhan, I have really underestimated you." After that, he turned around and disappeared completely from the noisy street, in the dormitory of the inferior compound. Bailey Jiaju's handsome figure stood in a room that didn't belong to him. His deep eyes swept across the empty bed inside, his long eyebrows slightly wrinkled. "Master, the princess consort should not be here." Fire Qilin's nose twitched. "Her breath is cold. It seems that she has been gone for quite a long time." Beligaju nodded faintly. His slender fingers slid across the table, bringing out a touch of coldness. "Master, should we continue to wait?" Fire Qilin looked at the furnishings around and thought that the princess consort was really something. It had lived for so many years, but it was the first time that it saw its master waiting for someone. One should know that its master was an extremely impatient person. Not to mention waiting for someone, he had never even sat down for someone. However, since yesterday, its master's behavior had surprised the Fire Qilin, who was a mythical beast. After a while, Beligaju walked out of the room. His long hair was blown by the night wind. His slender fingers were perfectly wrapped under the gloves. There was a hint of self-mockery at the corner of his mouth. If he did not look for her, she would not know where to throw him away. When had he, Beligaju, ever been like this? "Master." Fire Qilin raised its eyebrows in confusion. Beligaju looked at the swaying bamboo forest in the distance. The breeze was blowing and even his voice was cold. "Go to the commercial compound." "Ha! Go to the commercial compound." Fire Qilin raised its head silently and looked at the bright moon. Its master was really not suitable for the atmosphere at the commercial compound. Every time he went, he would be surrounded. Didn't its master say that he hated going to the commercial compound the most? What happened today? Chapter 302. When Fire Qilin couldn't figure out a problem, it liked to pluck its own fur. Every time it did so, the creatures hidden underground would tremble. As a result, the flowers, birds, fishes, and insects within a few hundred miles of the inferior compound all jumped up and shouted at Beligaju. Please, quickly take your pet away. If a single strand of its fur fell on them, it could burn them to death. Have some self-awareness. Pa, Hellion Vivian sat on the second floor of the tea house and put down the armament that Jing Wushuang gave her. She smiled faintly and said, "This thing is not bad. It is indeed made by young Master Wushuang. I really didn't expect that one day I would be praised by the boss of Profound Heaven. I thought that in your eyes, we are all stubborn old antiques." Jing Wushuang lowered his eyes and drank a mouthful of tea. His long sleeves fluttered, bringing out a faint medicinal fragrance. Hellion Wei Wei stretched and smiled slyly. That's just an excuse to motivate the employees. Profound Heaven is still a new armament company. Compared to you guys, we have to have some other unique features to capture the market. Being your enemy is really a headache. Jing Wushuang seemed to be quite helpless, his transparent fingertips supporting his forehead. Hellion Vivian smiled and slightly narrowed her eyes, with a bit of laziness. A gust of night wind blew, and a few pear blossoms fell on her eyebrows and eyelashes. Jing Wushuang looked at her and curved his thin lips. He reached out and wanted to brush away the petals on her head. After interacting with each other once or twice, Hellion Wei Wei didn't evade. She only watched as he extended a hand that was as smooth as jade in front of her. Then, he paused and immediately withdrew his hand. His face revealed an extremely faint smile, as if he was looking at someone. Hellion Vivian followed his gaze and slowly looked downstairs. She saw the white-clothed, black-haired Beligaju standing there coldly. His long and narrow peach blossom eyes flashed with a cold light, as cold as frost. Beligaju looked at this scene, his pair of eyes floating up and down. The emotions that were rarely stirred up were now raging violently in the bottom of his heart, as if they were about to burst out of his throat. Almost instinctively, Beligaju's slender and cold fingertips touched the white skin of his throat. He exerted a little force, and the external pain slightly balanced the burning heat inside. After that, he indifferently withdrew his gaze from Hellion Wei Wei's body and strolled into the long alley. Hellion Vivian also guessed the same. It was time to talk to the other party about terminating the contract. The night grew darker. The fire Qilin sized up Beligaju's expression. "Master, you, bang." Without waiting for fire Qilin to finish speaking, Beligaju punched the wall. He did not do anything for the past 2 days. Every day when the sun went down, he would wait for her. She, on the other hand, had turned a deaf ear to his words time and time again. The thin fog dispersed. Hellion Vivian only drank 2 cups of tea with Jing Wushuang. The main point was to talk about the disassembly of armaments. However, Hellion Vivian did not hand over all her secrets. Some things only appeared in modern times. If she said, it would inevitably cause some trouble. Jing Wushuang was indeed a person who made people feel comfortable to get along with. Young Master Yan Ryu was probably talking about this kind of person. Hellion Vivian thought as she walked in the direction of the inferior compound. The night was quieter, and the echoes of footsteps in the alley were very clear. Hellion Vivian could hear the sound of footsteps following behind her. It followed her and stopped, rising and falling at the same time. Hellion Vivian guessed that it must be Shadow, who had been transferred away before, who had returned. She walked all the way to the door and suddenly realized that the sound of footsteps had disappeared. Hellion Wei Wei wrinkled her eyebrows and stood there for a while before finally turning her head and looking into the distance. After seeing that there wasn't a soul in sight, her eyes narrowed again. Just as she was about to push open the door, her head was covered by a white robe without any impurities. Beligaju's voice sounded coldly, "You're having a good time. So happy that you don't even want to go home." Hellion Vivian wanted to pull down the robe, but that person had already pinned her to the wall. Do you believe that if you dare to move, I'll feed Qingzhan to Qilin? Fire Qilin. Wait, I'm not a dog. Hellion Vivian could only stay still and look at the man's long legs under the robe. Beligaju carried her all the way into the room. However, Hellion Vivian felt that the situation was not right. That day, he was the one who said whatever. Moreover, why didn't he look for his personal servant girl but came to her place to stop her? Hellion Vivian thought for a while, then pulled the robe away and asked, "Why are you here?" "I've been waiting for you for 2 days." Beligaju looked at her and his voice was cold. Hellion Vivian was confused. "You've been waiting for me for 2 days. I told you to come and find me at night." Bailey Jiaju smiled faintly, bringing out an evil aura that made people terrified. "But it's very obvious that you've already forgotten." Hellion Wei paused for a moment. "I also want to talk to you about this matter." "Talk about what?" Beligaju lifted her chin with his fingers and looked at her coldly. "Before you talk, I advise you to think about whether I'll like what you're going to say next." Hellion Vivian smiled. "Don't worry, you'll definitely like to hear it. It's about setting you free." "Setting me free?" Beligaju's fingers slowly clenched. He wanted to hear how she was going to set him free. Hellion Wei sat up straight. Although she was still holding him in her arms, compared to before, it was obvious that there was a relative distance between them. "I've thought about it. Now that the wedding is over, the retired emperor won't rush you too much. Your Highness can totally go and do your own things. When we were signing the contract, I anticipated many situations and felt that I could handle them. However, there was one thing that I neglected. This contract is very likely to affect other people. Fortunately, we both agreed that if I meet someone I like, the contract will automatically become invalid." "Someone I like." Beligaju's eyes were completely cold. "Are you talking about me or you?" "What? Is Jing Wushuang so good that you don't even want my help?" Hellion Vivian was silent for a while, then raised her head and said, "It has nothing to do with him. It's just that I thought about it. In this world, it's better to rely on yourself than anyone else, because other people can't be relied on. Moreover, I don't want to be anyone's shield." "What do you mean?" Beligaju faintly wrinkled his long eyebrows. "What I mean is, don't you think that we've been quarreling every time we see each other? Actually, you don't have to be like this. If someone really comes back and wants to part ways with me, you can just tell me directly." She also had a debt of gratitude towards him. She was really annoyed by the dark shadows who were making a ruckus. It would be better for him to say it, that would make her feel better. Chapter 303. I'm not someone who doesn't know how to appreciate favors. Hellion Vivian continued, "You don't have to beat around the bush and let the people around you tell you." Bang. Before she could finish speaking, Hellion Vivian felt a vibration in her ears. His black-gloved fist smashed against the wall. He didn't care about his bleeding fingers and slowly lowered his body. His mouth was smiling, but there was no warmth in his eyes. "You are the first person who dared to part ways with this king, and the only one who survived. I'm just thinking of a solution." Hellion Vivian didn't change her expression. She had always believed that he was a reasonable person. Bailey Jiaju looked at the expression on her face. His complexion suddenly became a bit colder. And in the next second, she saw Bailey Jiaju's hand swept in her direction with a ghostly speed. His half-narrowed eyes carried a cold murderous intent. Following Yuan Ming's shout, "Be careful." Hellion Vivian clenched her fist. Her hand didn't stop moving. Her palm moved and her finger moved to the side. Half a second later, the sound of a sword piercing through flesh echoed in her ears, coldly exploding in the air. Hellion Vivian stared blankly at Beligaju in front of her. The dagger in her hand had pierced through the man's shoulder blade. Behind her, a strange-looking demonic beast struggled with its face, and then completely vanished into nothingness. Yuan Ming held his forehead and looked up at the sky. "Woman, I told you to be careful behind you." Hellion Vivian didn't say anything. She only looked at the man's bleeding wound and her mind went blank for a moment. Then, she saw the man's lips suddenly pull back into that familiar lazy and charming arc. It was low and pleasing to the ear like spring water flowing under ice. There was a trace of imperceptible anger in the coldness. His voice was cold and somewhat forceful. "I can stop the contract, but you're mine. I have to take you away." Having heard what was said, Wei Wei stared blankly and couldn't help but somewhat laugh. This kind of "you're my toy, even if you're broken, you're still mine" tone really didn't seem like something the aloof and remote third prince would say. Beligaju ignored her. His jade-like hand brushed past several major acupuncture points on Hellion Vivian's body like lightning. With a light flick of his finger, the dagger that pierced through his body was easily broken like a fragile grass root. He didn't even look at the wound on his body and carried the person in his arms horizontally. Along the way, he covered Hellion Vivian with his windbreaker, not letting anyone's heads out. Some students who came out at night didn't know what's in his arms. After all, they were far apart. Beligaju's eyes. Before the students could react, the person in front of them disappeared. They could only faintly see the back of a figure hidden in the clouds. When they entered the room, Beligaju casually threw the windbreaker covering her head to the ground. Then, he pressed Hellion Vivian against the wall and kissed her. The man's clear breath suddenly approached. It was like a lotus flower or snow, intoxicating. The domineering and passionate kiss was mixed with uncontrollable anger. It was so passionate that it was suffocating. He clasped her slender waist with one hand and pinched her chin with the other. He kissed her deeply, as if he was forcing her. It was that kind of suffocating feeling again. From the entrance to the inner room, Hellion Wei Wei didn't have enough time to unseal the acupoints on her body before she was directly put down on the soft couch by him. Her breath was filled with the other's clear and cold sandalwood fragrance. "Woman, since he's taking the initiative, why don't you just follow him and take the opportunity to cultivate more?" Yuan Ming's noisy voice still sounded in her ears. Hellion Vivian directly cut off the telepathic communication with him and locked him in the Xuanhuan space. Only then did she feel a little more peaceful. At this time, her acupuncture points were opened. She directly pressed the man's hand and looked at Beligaju with some difficulty in breathing. Beligaju's eyes seemed to have fallen into an ice cellar because of this silent rejection. There was a deep madness hidden in his eyes. His originally black pupils gradually contracted and a cold light appeared, as if they were about to turn into a pair of demon eyes. It was almost as if he couldn't control his instincts. Hellion Vivian saw it very clearly. That pair of indifferent eyes were now glowing with a light that was clearly suppressed and crazy. It was so crazy that it was almost twisted. Hellion Vivian felt that her situation was a little dangerous. She wanted to speak. But she was stopped by the other party's smile. "If I were you, I would choose to shut up at this time." As he spoke, Beligaju's knees slowly moved, and then he stepped over the straight long legs of the person on the bed and covered her body. "Why do you always reject me?" When did she reject him? Fine, it was true. But if anyone pounced on her, she would lie down obediently. Didn't this feel a little ridiculous? It was too ridiculous. "I clearly gave you many chances, but you didn't learn at all. You insisted that I lock your claws so that you would be at peace." "What chance?" He said it as if he didn't lock her up. Did he forget the bed on the day of the wedding? "What did you promise before coming up the mountain?" "You made me wait for so long." "Dear, if you're not happy, why can't I wait for you for 2 days?" Speak. Hellion Vivian. Who was the one who told her to shut up in the first place? Are you planning to discuss this with me while bleeding? Hellion Wei Wei sighed. Her hand was still on Bailey Jia Ju's wrist. She flipped over in the air and flipped down from the soft couch. After that, she familiarly pulled out a white handkerchief from the drawer of the desk at the side. At this time, Baligaju had already sat up. His holy white robe fluttered slightly and the light in his eyes gradually calmed down. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and pulled open his collar. She first looked at the wound. Then, she lowered her head and wiped it with cotton wool. She sprinkled the powder on it. Raise your arm. Baligaju was quite easy to talk to sometimes. His handsome side profile was quite good. Hellion Wei Wei looked at his slightly wrinkled long eyebrows expression, the corners of her mouth curved up, then she tore the white handkerchief into strips and skillfully tied a butterfly knot. What was that thing just now? Unexpectedly, she didn't feel the slightest bit that someone was approaching her. A hidden beast. Bailey Jia Ju sized her up with a glance, his tone was as indifferent as water. That's why, as a married woman, don't go out at night and casually meet other people. If you're tainted with something unclean, don't even think about keeping your life. Hellion Wei Wei felt some pain in her knees. Why was it that every time His Highness spoke, he was able to link this and that together? But, why is there such a thing in the academy? Baligaju slowly adjusted his collar with his slender fingers. His eyes darkened. Something must have happened in the forest of fantasy. Hellion Vivian listened quietly. Her eyes were clear as if she had thought of a good idea. Just as she was about to stand up, she was pulled back by the man. Chapter 304. Only to hear a caw sound. She wore a chain of exquisite workmanship on her wrist. It was the forbidden martial black iron lock, a divine weapon specially used to imprison martial artists. It was said that there were at most 3 in the entire Dragon War Empire, and they were priceless. Hellion Vivian was a martial artist, so she was most familiar with the use of this kind of thing. Was he really planning to lock her up? Hellion Vivian just wrinkled her eyebrows. A slight chill came from her wrist, and his fingers slowly rubbed her skin. Look, it suits you so well. His voice was still low and calm, and it even had a bit of elegance and leisure like the spring breeze. However, Hellion Wei Wei detected a sense of danger from this calm and refined voice. She lowered her eyes, and her voice became cold. No one would like this kind of fit, Your Highness. Is this how you treat your ally? It seems that I still have value, and it's hard for Your Highness to use such an expensive chain to lock me up. The current situation was not the result she wanted to see. But what gave her a headache was that a certain highness seemed to have a particularly serious hobby in this area. She reckoned that only he could give people a kind of inviolable cold and handsome look when he was using an iron lock to lock people up. Was there a mistake? In the end he was the one doing bad things. Hellion Vivian ridiculed in her heart, but she was not willing to go to the point of going against Baligaju. What else do you need me to do? It's better to say it directly, and we can end it happily. Hellion Vivian thought so in her heart, so she also said her thoughts. She felt that it would be better to say it out loud. However, she didn't expect that after she finished speaking, the look in Bailey Jia Ju's eyes was even colder than before. End happily. He looked up and saw that her expression was very calm, as if she wanted to negotiate with him peacefully. For a moment, he only felt that it was incomparably dazzling. In her eyes, there was no him, there had always been no him. Baligaju curled his lips into a smile, but that smile did not reach his eyes. Instead, it was a cold expression on his face. There will be no happy ending. The things that I want can only stay by my side. So, Your Highness used this method. Helene Vivian tugged at the iron lock on her wrist and raised her eyebrows mockingly. Beligaju's back stiffened, and his hands slowly clenched into fists under the blanket. Since when did he need to use such a method to keep a woman? Even if this was not in line with his usual style of doing things, the War Dragon Empire's most respected royal family descendant, the insufferably arrogant royal family, when was there anything that he could not obtain? However, Helene Vivian was such an exception. He was confident that he could control everything, but when it came to her, he was helpless. What? Do you think this method is despicable? His voice was low and deep, but it also carried a cold smile. A light breeze blew through his black hair, covering his beautiful eyes. I am such a despicable person. I am fundamentally different from the deskmate you imagined. Now that you finally understand, you want to escape. Ha ha ha. Hearing the word deskmate, Helene Vivian could not help but look into those deep and intense black eyes. The usual transparent feeling disappeared and was replaced by a bone-piercing coldness. She could even clearly feel the coldness when the man approached her, as well as the cold breath he exhaled. Helene Vivian was stunned. Her outstretched hand froze in midair. She did not know why, but she felt that in that extremely cold voice, there was a wetness that made people care. It was as if he was desperate to the extreme, and it made people feel lonely. Behind him, countless oil lamps fell to the ground. The wooden table shook violently because of him, and the wind whistled. He was angry. Maybe this time, he really wanted to strangle her to death. But after waiting for a while, the boiling anger did not burn her body. Fire Qilin was standing outside the door. He knew better than anyone that the vibration from the blood could burst out from the blood vessels. It was so hot that it could almost burn the heart. He did not know what happened, but the only thing they were sure of was that this burning feeling came from his angry master. In the darkness, the door and windows in the room made a clang, clang, clang sound. A strong wind swept in, whistling like a wild beast outside the room. Suddenly, a huge gust of wind blew in front of them. White lightning flashed in the sky, and the glass window had already hit the window frame heavily. Beligaju was standing under that window. Helene Vivian was shocked. She looked up and did not care whether he was angry or not. He leaped over and forcefully swapped the two of them. At the same time, she heard a clang sound behind her, followed by a large area of brittle shattering. Only the sharp edge of the glass window was left. It firmly hit Helene Vivian's arched back. Under the lightning, the floor was full of broken glass shards. Beligaju was stunned. The wind and clouds stopped. He looked at her and forgot to move for a moment. Helene Vivian supported herself with one hand. The iron chain made a sound, and she shouted at Beligaju, "If you have the ability to call the wind and summon the rain, then you have the ability to dodge. Bastard, do you think you can be willful just because you are handsome?" Beligaju reacted at this time. He hugged her, and as if he was anxious, his fingers touched her back. Helene Vivian was shocked. She pressed his hand again. "What are you doing? Take your hand away." These words could not be more overbearing. Helene Vivian raised her eyebrows. Was this his attitude towards his savior? However, the gentleness of his fingers did not match his tone at all. Helene Vivian's back was originally fine. After all, she had done a lot of training. She knew what posture to use to block a heavy object when it fell. It would minimize the damage. But he took off her clothes and examined her as if she were a product of daily use. Helene Vivian did not know whether to laugh or cry. As if he had finally finished examining her, Beligaju looked at the smooth and white back in front of him. Then, very gently, he pulled her into his arms. His chin seemed to be resting on top of her head. There was a hard-to-detect deep voice in his voice, "Wait for this king here." Helene Vivian looked at him as if he was about to leave. Her eyebrows raised again. At this point, he still did not plan to untie the thing on her hand. Beligaju seemed to be in a hurry. He waved his sleeve and ordered the shadow outside the door, "Look after the princess." "Yes." Shadow's face was filled with astonishment from just now. Until now, he didn't know what to feel. Seeing his master quickly disappear into the night, he couldn't help but murmur, looking at His Highness' expression, he should have guessed that Miss Yun has returned. Hellion Vivian was lying on the soft couch. Hearing the movement outside, she laughed. So it was like that. His Highness' reaction was a bit too slow. Hellion Vivian mockingly moved the iron chain on her wrist. Her eyes looked at the dangling hair ornament on the ground. Chapter 305. Outside the room, in the darkness. Fire Cheelan's figure could be vaguely seen. Beligaju glanced at him and said in a calm voice, "How many more hidden beasts are there in the academy?" "There are still a few." Fire Cheelan lowered its eyes. "It's almost certain that Hellion Weiwei's body has been possessed, because the hidden ground beasts will only approach and attack souls that have occupied other people's bodies. Then, they will pull them out of their original bodies and drag them underground. Someone brought the hidden ground beasts here, and they must be targeting her." Beligaju's eyes turned cold. His long black hair fell down along the side of his face, making his cold and beautiful eyes look even more beautiful and murderous. Fire Cheelan continued, "Master, why didn't you tell Hellion Vivian that you used the forbidden black iron lock to lock her up because it can avoid being found by hidden beasts?" Bailey Jia Ju casually glanced at the Fire Cheelan and said, "Because that is only a small part of the reason." As he said that, he sneered and said, "Go and find those bugs for me first." "Yes." Fire Cheelan's eyes lit up and suddenly turned into a divine beast. Like a whirlwind, it galloped in the dark night. Its speed was so fast that it was impossible to see its shadow. No one knew what was happening. Because only beasts could feel the threat of an ancient divine beast. The hidden beasts that were searching for something near the inferior compound suddenly stopped and wanted to run away. But how could Fire Cheelan let them run away? This was a chance to show its might and majesty. Fire Cheelan shook its smooth fur and narrowed its eyes. It paused and ran back and forth between the two corners of the northeast and northeast. It was having a lot of fun. So on this day, many little beasts saw this scene. Boss Fire Cheelan chased after those hidden beasts like a herd of sheep. Even when they went up to ask for a pet, Boss Fire Cheelan ignored them. But this didn't stop them from worshipping their boss with all their hearts. Starry eyes. Beligaju frowned slightly. He really couldn't agree with the beauty of these beasts. As for the Fire Cheelan, it seemed to have sensed the gazes of admiration around it. It puffed up its chest and chased after the crouching beasts even more vigorously, forcing them all in front of Beligaju. The crouching beasts had a natural instinct for danger. However, there was still a human standing in their way. Of course, they wouldn't pay much attention to it. They just wanted to scratch Beligaju to death with their claws. A total of 6 crouching beasts the size of wild wolves pounced toward Bailey Jia Ju with murderous intents. Their eyes were blinding. Beligaju didn't even make a move. He just stood there elegantly in the dark. He frowned slightly, and his long green robe fluttered. The crouching beasts seemed to have been punished severely. They were all bounced back to the ground, rolling back and forth in pain. They had no idea who they had offended. Beligaju walked over and looked around. His teeth bit off his black gloves, and his thin lips gently spit out a string of cold. "There is one more." Indeed, there was one more. The crouching beasts were different from other beasts. They were the classic group of beasts. They liked to drag people's souls underground. Normally, they wouldn't show themselves at all. During the day, they would hide in the thick bushes and only move at night. When they moved, they would listen to the command of the Beast King. And now, that Beast King had not appeared yet. Beligaju narrowed his eyes. Suddenly, he reached out his hand and a smaller beast than the other crouching beasts appeared in front of him. Its entire body was black. However, its pair of frightening white eyes were too evil. If a normal person saw it, they would definitely be shocked. This was the Beast King of the Crouching Beasts, a top-level beast. The Beast King of the Crouching Beasts clearly didn't expect that a human would be able to see through its disguise. It was so shocked that its heart was beating wildly. However, it wasn't scared like the other crouching beasts. Because in its eyes, no matter how powerful the other party was, it was still just a human. However, in the next moment, it felt regret. Because behind that person stood the ancient divine beast that could absolutely proclaim itself as the king of the world, the Fire Qilin. The Beast King couldn't help but curl up into a ball. Its face was filled with unprecedented respect and fear. Only then did it seriously examine the man's face. Who are you? You think you're worthy of asking for my name? The corners of Bailey Jiaju's mouth were still curved. His face was as handsome as a god's as he looked down at the magical beast from above. His eyes, which were covered with golden lines, narrowed. The Beast King looked at those familiar eyes and turned around. Its sharp claws kept scratching the ground in an attempt to escape. Tap, 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 the sound of footsteps behind it echoed in the empty night. It was elegant and gentle, but bloodthirsty. The Beast King knew that it couldn't escape. It knelt on the ground and began to beg for mercy. I beg you, please spare me. I was also ordered by someone else. Oh. Beligaju seemed to have heard the funniest joke. You want me to spare you? The Beast King's eyes turned. I can tell you who ordered me to do this. I don't want to hurt anyone. It was you humans who brought me in. Is that so? Beligaju's expression was indifferent as he stopped in his tracks. The Beast King nodded furiously, but its claws were exposed. Yes, yes. Ha! Beligaju curled his thin lips and grabbed its claws. Do you really think that I would believe your words? Why would a demonic beast listen to a human's orders? Unless that person is your master. The only condition for a demonic beast to make an agreement with a human is that it cannot betray the other party. Creak. The crisp sound of bones cracking could be heard. In an instant, the Beast King, who was staggering on the ground, seemed to remember something. It looked at that handsome face and its eyes shook violently. This man, was it him? No. Impossible. The Beast King wanted to say something, but before it could open its mouth, its neck was broken by the man's grip. The Beast King's head tilted to one side. Before its eyes lost its luster, it was full of regret. Bailey Jiaju retracted his hand, the light in his eyes was as cold as the stars. His surroundings seemed to be emitting a radiance similar to the bright moon. Within a radius of a few miles, not a single beast dared to approach him. Except for the Fire Qilin. It stood behind the man, its big paws stepping on the ground as it said in a deep voice, Master, this Beast King is able to speak, which means that it must have drunk the blood of the person who raised it. However, the person who can make the crouching ground beast work for him, is not easy to deal with. Master, I have a premonition, something must have come to White Academy. Bailey Jiaju didn't say anything, but that pair of pitch-black eyes were much deeper than before. The night wind blew. Hellion Vivian held the dangling hair ornament in her right hand. The delicate end was aimed at the lock cylinder. She tested it back and forth, and a thin layer of sweat overflowed from her forehead. Suddenly, her eyes lit up. Chapter 306. Caw. The iron chain fell. Helene Vivian turned her wrist but did not feel much pain. She glanced at the expensive iron chain and decided to just throw it away since it would be a waste. When the door was opened, and Ying's body froze. Helene Vivian looked at him lazily. He didn't realize it just now. Now that he knows Yun Biluo is back, he won't have the time to care about me. Aning, do you want to fight or let me go? Aning looked at Helene Vivian and did not know how to answer the question. He just blocked her way respectfully. Princess, I'm sorry, I can't let you go. He had to obey his master's order. Helene Vivian smiled and said handsomely, do you think you can stop me? Princess, please don't make things difficult for me. Shadow had always been the taciturn type. Facing Wei Wei, he didn't know what to do. Apart from his highness, the bigger reason was that he didn't want to hurt this girl who was different from him. Helene Vivian's eyes flashed, well, it's not easy for you. I'll wait for Baligaju to come back. Thank you, Princess. Aning was still very vigilant. He stared at Helene Vivian and waited for her to close the door. Helene Vivian chuckled and walked forward slowly. Aning looked at her back and was on guard. When he was about to reach out, he heard the sound of wind and subconsciously blocked it. The sparks caused by the friction between the martial arts were reflected in Helene Vivian's eyes. She curled her lips and smiled at Aning, good skill. Aning did not say anything. But Helene Wei Wei paused for a moment and moved her fingers. The other end of the umbrella emitted bursts of smoke. Aning wanted to hold his breath but it was too late. His vision turned black and he fell to the ground with a thud. Helene Wei Wei took back the umbrella and looked at the unconscious shadow. The corners of her mouth carried an evil aura. Do you think it's just an ordinary umbrella? As she spoke, she bent down and dragged Shadow into the room. Because she was afraid of provoking His Highness' mysophobia, she was very considerate and didn't put Shadow on a chair, only letting him lean against the wall. After changing their outer garments and straightening their collars, they strolled out of the inferior compound. Outside the courtyard, there were still a few shadows hiding in various corners. Although they did not appear, Helene Vivian could still feel the gazes around her. If she hadn't been wearing this set of clothes, she would have been surrounded the moment she left the hospital. Helene Vivian was good at disguising herself, so she didn't reveal any flaws along the way. After leaving the courtyard, she didn't hesitate and directly turned around to go to Tu Su Feng's courtyard. Helene Vivian was not worried whether Tu Su Feng was asleep or not. As the Dean of White Academy, that person had always slept very late. In addition, he had to take care of a child. As soon as Helene Vivian walked into the brightly lit courtyard, she saw the little 7th prince with a stack of wooden bowls on his head. The little 7th prince looked at her and blinked. He was very calm, third sister-in-law. Helene Vivian raised her eyebrows. What are you doing? I was caught stealing meat. Speaking of this, the little 7th prince seemed to be very upset. Even his cute little eyebrows were wrinkled. Helene Vivian glanced at his appearance. How long more do you want to wear this? The dean didn't say. The little 7th prince watched as Helene Vivian took a step forward. He also took a step forward, his short and thick legs swaying. Helene Vivian reached out and took down the wooden bowls on his head. Where's the dean? He's sighing. The little 7th prince seriously threw all the wooden bowls into the ancient well. I've been too naughty recently. He can't explain it to Imperial Grandfather. Helene Vivian, you also know. A helpless light laugh came from behind. Helene Wei Wei looked back and saw Tu Su Feng, who was wearing a long robe, slowly walking over. He still didn't have the slightest change. He was elegant and upright. The years had accumulated too much brilliance on his body. Just looking at him was enough to make people believe in him. In his hand was a steaming hot meat bun. There was no need to guess to know who he was giving it to. The little seventh prince naively ran over and took the meat bun. He opened his mouth and took a bite. As he ate, he said, "I'm just a bit more competitive." "You're just a little more competitive." Tu Su Feng's slender fingers rubbed his forehead, "So competitive that you broke the arms of those young masters from the superior compound." The little seventh prince held the meat bun and seriously said, "I was saving them. If they went to fight with third brother, their injuries would be even more serious." Tu Su Feng admitted that the little one's words were reasonable. Then, he thought of those posts saying that the people the academy recently accepted were too unruly, and his head hurt even more. Not a single one can be worry-free. Especially that one, who didn't care about anyone at all. What restraint was there to speak of? After the Yuan family stepped down, the Liang family squeezed in and mentioned the inferior compound by name. What they talked about was the problem with Beligaju. Those people still didn't know Beligaju's identity. Last time, they wanted to rope him in, but how could the third prince go under these people's tutelage? Therefore, no matter if it was the Liang family or the great masters in the academy, they all sent one post after another to him. Fortunately, it was Tu Su Feng who was in charge. If it was someone else, they would have been unable to withstand the pressure. Such a person, the battle spirit forces couldn't possibly not accept him into the martial arts. Hellion Vivian curled her lips into a smile. She didn't beat around the bush and directly flashed the military seal in her hand. Tu Su Feng's eyes were slightly stunned. "This is... I want to have a good talk with the dean about the Forest of Fantasy." Hellion Vivian kept the military seal and said, "And about the internal specifications of the battle spirit forces." Tu Su Feng smiled. "I don't know much about the battle spirit forces, but we can talk about the Forest of Fantasy." Hellion Vivian glanced at him. "I have a piece of news that will affect the safety of the people in the capital city. I can only tell the people in the battle spirit forces." The little seventh prince listened to the conversation between the two adults at the side. He took a big bite of the meat bun, then opened his eyes wide and continued to watch. Tu Su Feng didn't fuss over the girls this time. Instead, he looked at Hellion Vivian and smiled. "You're really smart. Come, you're the second person who came looking for me today. The first one is Yun Biluo." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Tu Su Feng smiled. "It's her," but she didn't look in the right direction. Hellion Vivian didn't say anything else. She followed Tu Su Feng into the study room. Tu Su Feng skillfully turned the pen holder on the wooden table, and the wooden bookshelf opened to the left and right. A long and endless corridor appeared in front of Hellion Wei Wei just like that. Chapter 307. Tu Su Feng took the oil lamp and raised it high with one hand. The sound of his footsteps echoed back and forth unhurriedly. White Academy was not what it is now a long time ago. No one knows that there is a huge palace hidden under its ground. This palace is where the battle spirit forces are located. As soon as he finished speaking, a loud boom was heard. The huge torches on both sides were lit. Hellion Vivian could see the reflection under her feet. The smooth marble floor showed the luxury of the owner who built this palace. There were a total of 38 huge stone pillars supporting the entire dome. Tu Su Feng smiled and pointed with her white hand. "Look over there." Hellion Wei Wei looked down and saw thousands of soldiers yelling something. Some were eating, some were wiping their weapons, and some were wiping their weapons. The scale was so big that it was shocking. This was not a palace, it was an underground ancient city. Hellion Wei Wei turned her head around. Originally, she wanted to exchange a glance with the little seventh prince behind them to express her shock. She did not expect that the little seventh prince only had eyes for the braised pork in a soldier's bowl. This was enough. "Although it's late, I still want to say, welcome to the battle spirit forces." Tu Su Feng looked back with his slender figure. wait a little longer, the new members who joined with you will arrive soon. Helene Vivian crossed her arms. I thought the first person who found you would be rewarded. Otherwise, why would she be so enthusiastic? Of course there will be a reward. Tu Sufeng smiled gently. From now on, I will be your mentor. The others will have mentors who will be in charge of them. Helene Vivian chuckled. What a great reward. They are here. Tu Sufeng looked out. A gap suddenly opened in a cave not far away. The moonlight shone in. Faintly, 4 figures walked in. 4. Helene Vivian frowned and looked over. Apart from Yunbiluo and the rest, there was a very handsome man. It was not an exaggeration to describe him as handsome. His skin was fairer than a woman's, but he did not look feminine at all. Instead, he gave off an enchanting charm. When the man saw her, he suddenly laughed. What a coincidence. He knew her. Helene Vivian's eyes paused. How could she not remember seeing such a beautiful man? What? Don't you remember me? The man stroked his chin with a faint smile. Helene Vivian looked at him seriously for a while. A blurry image flashed through her mind. Little tyrant. That's right. Your eyesight isn't too bad. As he spoke, the man lowered his head and looked at the tiny figure. Why is he here too? The little 7th prince narrowed his eyes. Cousin Hanyu. Your family spell has been broken. Hanyu lifted his chin and said, how is it? Isn't it cool? The little 7th prince scratched his bald head and sized him up. Hanyu straightened his back. Not bad, but not as good-looking as 3rd brother. After saying that, the little 7th prince retracted his gaze, giving off a feeling of disdain. The corner of Hanyu's mouth twitched fiercely. Wei Wei restrained herself from laughing out loud. She also didn't know what His Highness did to the little tyrant that day at Armament City, to make him bear a grudge until now. It couldn't be that he also used iron chains or something to tie him to the bed. However, she could not be sure. After all, he even let him wear a dress. The 7th prince is still so likable. Yunbiluo walked over and looked at the little bald head who was full of vigor. The little one did not say anything. He had always adopted a silent and cold attitude towards people he was not familiar with. However, Yunbiluo was smart. No matter how the other party responded, she could always smile. Helene Vivian curved her thin lips and did not respond to anyone. Tu Sufeng listened to their conversation and said gently, it seems that all of you know each other. That's easy. For a long time in the future, all of you will be tested together. The test is divided into 3 parts. Those who pass the test will officially become a member of the Battle Spirit Forces. The test will take place in the White Academy. From now on, every minute and every second, all of you will have to tighten your nerves. This test will be very cruel and may even take your life away. So, if anyone wants to quit, you can say so now. No one spoke. Tu Sufeng smiled, that's good. If there are no other objections, then each of you can follow the instructor to pick your own room. This room is not for you to sleep in. There will be things that you will need to use when carrying out missions. As he spoke, Tu Sufeng glanced at Helene Vivian and the little 7th prince. Both of you, follow me. Helene Vivian nodded and followed. When they brushed past each other, Yunbiluo smiled at her. Helene Vivian had met such people before. They were polite and gentle, but it did not mean that they were friendly. On the contrary, one had to be wary of them. 3rd sister-in-law. The little 7th prince saw this and stopped in his tracks. He said in a fierce tone, don't talk to strangers. 3rd brother will be unhappy. Helene Vivian was speechless. What was the feeling of being taught a lesson? Moreover, the one standing opposite is the one your third brother cares about. Let's go. He waved his little sleeves. He could not be more domineering. Helene Vivian followed him, amused. The little one paused for a moment before reaching out both of his hands toward her. Helene Wei bent down with a smile and lifted him up in her arms. The little one leaned his head on Helene Vivian's shoulder. His eyes were still staring at Yun Biluo, full of warning. Yun Biluo tilted her head in confusion and laughed again. The little seventh prince did not speak. His face was cold. He did not like this woman. She acted as if she was very close to him. It was all because of third brother. The little one tilted his head and said to Helene Vivian coolly, "If you meet such a woman in the future, just tell third brother directly. She can't cook anyway, so it's useless to keep her." Helene Vivian's mouth twitched. It seems that cooking is a very important skill. It can save one's life at critical moments, of course. The little one said seriously. Tu Su Feng sighed countless times while walking in front. "This foodie. We're here. Go in and see what you need." Tu Su Feng pushed open the wooden door with his slender fingers and stood sideways. The room was not very big, but it gave people a sense of dazzling luxury. Rows of exquisite accessories were placed on the sandalwood table, and a bronze mirror as tall as a person stood in the middle. On the left and right sides of the table, in addition to colorful ancient long dresses, there were also exquisite shawls and countless dangling ornaments. These were only the women's necessities. On the other side, there were men's long robes for various occupations, from high-end to low-end. Everything was there. Chapter 308. After Helene Wei saw these things, she almost subconsciously thought of the room in young Master Tang's villa that was specially used to store disguise equipment. She could not help but raise her eyes to look at Tu Su Feng with admiration in her eyes. "These are all yours." Tu Su Feng picked up one of the dangling ornaments and then lightly turned it. Schwa! A sound rang out. 3 silver needles were shot straight into the wall with extraordinary strength. Helene Vivian curved her thin lips. "Not bad. Compared to your myriad manifestations umbrella, it's still a bit lacking." Tu Su Feng's tone didn't decrease in the slightest. Helene Vivian moved her fingers and picked up the rest of the items. She turned them left and right and then smiled. Each has its own use. Such a complete set of exquisite equipment, as expected of the world-famous battle spirit forces. With these things, they could appear and disappear like ghosts and kill without a trace of blood. "Now can you tell me the information you know?" Tu Su Feng's gaze was very indifferent. Helene Vivian put the items back. "Recently, the Forest of Fantasy has been a bit chaotic. Someone has been ignoring the rules and secretly killing large amounts of people." Hearing this, Tu Su Feng furrowed his thick eyebrows. "Large amounts of people?" "That's right." Helene Vivian paused and then added, "It seems that they want to use this method to extend their lives." Tu Su Feng looked at her. "Who are they?" Helene Vivian thought for a moment and then said, "The elders of the 4 great families." Tu Su Feng's eyes suddenly narrowed. "Do you know what you're facing by saying this?" "Of course." Helene Vivian smiled. "Principal, you can investigate first. There won't be any losses." Tu Su Feng lowered his voice. "There won't be any losses, but for the battle spirit forces, it's a challenge. If we offend the 4 great families, it will be very disadvantageous for the battle spirit forces in the future. I thought the battle spirit forces would not be afraid of any power." Helene Vivian lifted her chin slightly. Looking at her posture, Tu Su Feng's eyes suddenly darkened. He then took out a piece of paper and handed it to Helene Vivian. "This is the news we received last month. We don't know what happened in the Forest of Fantasy. Not only were the sacred beasts massacred in large numbers, those magical beasts that didn't come out of the forest of fantasy easily in the past have started to become restless and want to enter the city. A while ago, we sent a few people to investigate this matter, but none of them returned. If the 4 great families are involved, it will indeed be a little tricky. Hellion Vivian flipped through the piece of paper. It recorded everything that had happened in the forest of fantasy recently. Speaking of which, when she met Little White had said that someone wanted to kill it. It was probably from then on that the forest of fantasy started to fall into chaos. But to be able to disguise this chaos as peace, how meticulous was the other party? Hellion Vivian closed the piece of paper. Looks like the principal believed my words from the beginning. This matter is not a small matter. Tu Su Feng's eyes widened. Once the news is leaked, it is very likely that it will cause even more negative effects. You are all new members. If you want to take over this matter, you should pass the test first. Hellion Vivian smiled. Then what does the principal think of the military seal in my hand? It's still the same old saying, wait until you pass the test first. Tu Su Feng looked at her and smiled gently. In less than a second, he returned to being the principal of the White Academy, who was as difficult to deal with as a fox. I suddenly thought of something. It's already past the bedtime in the academy, but you're still wandering outside so late at night. According to the academy's rules, when you pay the tuition fee next month, you have to pay an extra 10 taels. After saying that, Tu Su Feng walked out of the room. Hellion Vivian looked at Tu Su Feng's back as he walked away. She had a headache and held her forehead. I've never seen someone who loves money so much. Do you have the right to criticize others? Yuan Ming despised her. Hellion Vivian directly ignored him and looked down at the little one. Where's your equipment? This. The little one moved his palm and a black wooden stick appeared in his hand. Hellion Vivian took it and looked left and right. The attack power is 90%. Not bad. When we return to the courtyard, I'll adjust it for you. Okay. Other than food, the little 7th prince usually spoke very little. Hearing this, Tu Su Feng, who was about to leave, suddenly turned back. Oh right, during the test, you will compete in pairs. The winner will be rewarded. After the reward just now, Hellion Vivian did not have any special thoughts about the reward. Tu Su Feng naturally understood her meaning. His smile deepened. Every time you win the test, you'll get 10,000 taels. When will the test start? Hellion Vivian immediately changed her attitude. This made the little 7th prince look at her with a heavy gaze. Hellion Vivian rubbed the little one's head. With the reward, I can buy you meat. Meat? The little 7th prince looked up and seriously repeated Hellion Vivian's question. When will the test start? Tu Su Feng was very satisfied with the combat power of these 2 people. He softly said, anytime. Then he paused and said, in addition to the 2 people you met today, there will be 2 more teams of foreign students. Don't embarrass our courtyard. The little 7th prince heard this and sneered. I'll beat them all up. How overbearing. Hellion Vivian felt that she could totally follow the little 7th prince in the future. There was no need for her to sign a contract with the royal family. Speaking of which, Yun Biluo was here. Wouldn't the royal family be disappointed if they could not find her? The night wind blew. In a corner of the inferior compound, Beligaju sat on the wooden chair, holding the long chain that was untied. He glanced at Aning, who had woken up but did not say anything. However, the atmosphere around him was more oppressive than ever. His expression changed from the indifference when he first came in to colder and colder. In the beginning, he thought that Hellion Vivian was taken away by someone. It wasn't until he saw that Shadow had lost his outer garment that his black eyes turned completely cold. Well, who could take her away? It was more likely that she ran away. Beligaju tightened his grip on the iron chain. Why did she always want to run away from him? Was it because of that Tang guy? Or did she think that he was no longer the clean desk mate she thought in her heart? She thought that he was vicious and his methods were dirty. So when she could not tolerate his methods, she could not tolerate Beligaju at the same time. His tolerance towards her and his repeated compromises towards her could not compare to the fact that Hellion Wei Wei did not care about him at all. It was really unforgivable. Beligaju covered his face with one hand. His 5 fingers tightly gripped the long chain in his palm. His body trembled slightly. Chapter 309. There were more than a dozen shadow guards standing quietly around him. The whole room fell into a deathly silence. This was the scene that He Zhu saw when she came to look for Ning. She didn't know that Beligaju was also in White Academy. She only saw that the figure standing in the middle of the room was very similar to her master. She couldn't help but widen her eyes. Why is His Highness here? Has His Highness been staying in White Academy all this time? That's why he chose that ugly woman Hellion Vivian as his consort. It's just for convenience. He Zhu thought of this and her heart moved. It's good that His Highness is here. In this way, she and her sister don't have to spend so much effort to get the little 7th prince into the palace. They just need to tell His Highness the news of her sister's return. Everything will be solved. That Hellion Vivian is definitely finished. Her tongue was cut by her. If it wasn't for her sister feeding her blood, she would have been crippled by now. That ugly woman Hellion Vivian, it's time to let her know what she is. He Zhu raised her mouth. She didn't know why His Highness looked a little different today, but she believed that as long as it's about her sister, His Highness will definitely deal with it first. Her sister has been with His Highness since childhood. After making up her mind, He Zhu jumped lightly and landed on the ground. When Ning saw that it was her, he furrowed his thick eyebrows and reached out to grab her. Why are you here? Why didn't you tell me that His Highness is here? He Zhu's eyes were full of doubt. You don't want His Highness to know the news. I really didn't expect that even you would stand on that ugly woman's side. Have you ever thought about my sister's feelings? Shadow lowered his voice. I advise you to leave immediately. Ha! Leave. He Zhu looked at him funny. What kind of witchcraft does that ugly woman have? Even you were fooled by her, why should I leave? I must tell His Highness the news of my sister's return. Seeing that he couldn't stop her, Shadow watched helplessly as she walked towards Bailey Jia Ju's direction. He could only feel helpless. Your Highness. He Zhu knelt down on one knee and said in a very reasonable manner, I don't know why Shadow and Princess Consort didn't tell you when they knew that my sister was back. Princess Consort is even more vicious. She ordered someone to cut off my tongue. I'm afraid she was worried that I would come to tell you about my sister's return after knowing that His Highness was in the White Academy. Beligaju gripped the iron lock in his hand and said in a low voice. Get lost. He Zhu didn't hear it clearly and thought that her voice was too soft. She paused and reached out to touch Beligaju's hand. Bang! Almost instantly, He Zhu was bounced to a corner by an invisible gas. There were dozens of wounds on his body, especially on his face. It was a mess of flesh and blood, leaving only the fear in his shaking eyes. Many of the shadow guards who were nearby were implicated, and they felt an intense pain in their internal organs. Bailey Jia Ju had a smile that was not a smile as he casually threw away the iron lock in his hand. He slightly raised his head. That pair of deep and narrow eyes seemed to ignite with a faint light, just like a demon that had walked out of a manga. His entire body carried a demonic aura. Such a strange situation made the shadow guards couldn't help but show fear. However, Fire Qilin was excited. How long has it been since he saw his master like this? Thousands of years had passed. He almost forgot his master's original appearance. Now, Fire Qilin ran back and forth excitedly and said in a deep voice, "Master, did you remember something?" Beligaju ignored him and walked closer to Heizhu. He looked down at the person kneeling on the ground and said in a cold voice, "Do you think anyone can touch me?" With that, his long and narrow eyes narrowed slightly. Heizhu's whole body became extremely painful. How could this be? Blood overflowed from the corner of her eyes and her blood boiled. Heizhu was puzzled. Was it because His Highness was in a rage and couldn't hear what she said? Otherwise, why would he treat her like this? Heizhu reached out and pinched her throat. The last trace of blood gushed out from her throat. That kind of pain was as if it was corroding her bones and heart. Bailey Jiaju seemed to smile for a moment. It was both elegant and dangerous. His expression carried boundless bewitchment and danger. "Who gave you the guts to talk about my woman? You all deserve to die." Bang! The last sound was. Heizhu's head completely tilted and no longer made a sound. The shadow guards trembled all over. They didn't understand what their master meant and didn't dare to look directly at Beligaju's eyes. They just stood there trembling. Beligaju turned around, his eyes like frost. "Find her and bring her back." These 5 words were like ice flowers blooming from the North Pole. It was so cold that everyone couldn't help but feel numb. The night was so dark that it became as sticky as splashed ink. Hellion Vivian and the little 7th prince walked out of the underground palace together. She didn't know if it was because it was too dark, but the swaying of the branches seemed a little eerie. The little 7th prince wasn't afraid, but he was obviously a little sleepy. As he walked, his little head kept nodding. After nodding to a certain extent, he shook his little tiger head and looked straight ahead. Hellion Vivian's heart was about to melt. She bent down and picked up the little one. The little 7th prince was a little shy at first. After all, he remembered 3rd brother's words. A real man couldn't be carried by others. But he couldn't reject 3rd sister-in-law. Sigh, it was so difficult to be a man. The little one had a tiger face and nodded very seriously on Hellion Vivian's shoulder. His eyelids drooped and were about to cover his lively tiger eyes. Suddenly, he seemed to have heard something. His little body stood up and his eyes started to shine. Hellion Vivian frowned and didn't move immediately. The sound behind them was getting louder and louder. It sounded like countless long snakes were crawling. In the fog, the dark body that had almost blended into the night seemed to be enjoying the sweet scent in the air that it had not smelled for a long time. There was a kind of creature that would never let go once it made up its mind. The delicious taste was definitely worth the effort. It would just wait until there was no one else around and use the darkness to devour her. To it, the walls were nothing and it could move freely. When the demon-transforming beast reached a certain level, it was no longer limited to its body size. It could transform into any shape at will. It was drooling and its legs were floating in the air. It was surrounded by a grayish-black mass of air. It looked at Hellion Vivian in front of it with satisfaction. It opened and closed its mouth slightly. Black balls of sticky liquid came out of its mouth and flew straight ahead. Chapter 310. All of a sudden, Hellion Vivian's palm emitted a dazzling light that gradually formed a black paper umbrella. The black fog was blocked by the black umbrella mercilessly like a fragile spider web. The demon-transforming beast's expression changed. Its body that was suspended in the air shook violently. The black fog was separated from its body. It was a part of its body. When the black fog was destroyed, it was as if a piece of its body was cut off. It was very harmful to it. Damn it! The demon-transforming beast cursed in a low voice and stared at the black umbrella that was emitting a strange light. Which bastard was messing with it? The demon-transforming beast reached out its hand angrily and wanted to destroy the golden lotus with its long and sharp fingernails. However, when the demon-transforming beast's fingernails touched the black umbrella, the demon-transforming beast was shocked and withdrew its hand. It widened its eyes and looked at the fingertips that it had always been proud of. But now, a large part of it was cut off by the person on the bed with a dagger. This was impossible. The weapons in the human world could not hurt it at all. Do you know what will happen to you if you disturb us at this time of night? Hellion Vivian glanced at the demon-transforming beast indifferently and looked back lazily. Behind her was Yuan Ming with his silver hair fluttering in the wind and a smile on his face. He was the messenger of the demon that was feared. The demon-transforming beast's expression changed abruptly. It was out of its wits and wanted to run away. Hellion Wei Wei sensed its intention and sneered. Carrying the little seventh prince in one hand, she opened the umbrella and moved her fingertips slightly. Amidst the piercing sound of the wind, countless fallen leaves bound the demon-transforming beast. Ah! The demon-transforming beast screamed. Its ugly body immediately turned into a wisp of green smoke and was sucked into Yuan Ming's stomach as nutrients. The little seventh prince stared with his tiger-like eyes. He thought that he would have a chance to fight. It seemed that third sister-in-law did not need him at all. In the past, whenever they encountered evil beasts, third brother would always let him take the lead while third brother would follow behind him casually. Perhaps third brother chose third sister-in-law not only because she was a good cook, but also because she was good at fighting. Yes, third brother really has good taste. Hellion Vivian did not know what the little one was thinking. She could not help but raise her eyebrows when she was stared at by the pair of piercing tiger eyes. What's wrong? I'm fine. The little seventh prince rubbed his chin and continued to stare. Obviously, there was something going on. You want to eat meat? This was the only possibility that Hellion Vivian could think of. Little seventh prince explained to Hellion Vivian in a dignified manner, what I'm thinking now is that third brother probably chose you because he wants you to fight magical beasts for him. As for eating meat, that's something I have to think about all the time. Fighting demonic beasts, this was not an instance dungeon. All the time. Well, she was wrong. She shouldn't have used the thinking of an ordinary person to connect with a foodie. However, that thing just now, what was it? Hellion Vivian hugged the little one and her eyes darkened. She heard Yuan Ming whisper in her ear, "It's a phantom beast, a type of demonic beast. It's really strange. When did the Battle Spirit Forces test become so difficult? They released the phantom beast right after the test. Aren't they afraid that you will be swallowed by the phantom beast? Sometimes it will create all kinds of illusions. Once a person has an inner demon, it will be very difficult to escape. Fortunately, you discovered it in time. Otherwise, if you were pulled into the illusions, it would be a dead end. However, the phantom beast will not act on its own. There must be at least two of them. One is responsible for creating illusions and the other is responsible for eating people. Now, it seems that there is only one left. Escaped. Hellion Vivian looked around. Yuan Ming nodded, it's very possible. The phantom beast is more cunning than any other demonic beast. Woman, it seems that you won't be peaceful for the next few days. The phantom beast is the most vengeful demonic beast. You killed their companion, they will not let it go. Then I'll wait for them to come again. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. Her whole body was emitting an evil aura. The corner of Yuan Ming's mouth curled up. His eyes were filled with evil. You'd better ask the person in charge of the battle spirit forces. A cold voice split the chaos. Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed with surprise. Her voice also became lazy. You're awake. Yes. The little white cat jumped out of the darkness. Its amber eyes were emitting the light of a king. After successfully passing the heavenly tribulation, its fur was more lustrous than before. Every strand of its hair seemed to be dyed with frost. It was incomparably noble. Little Seventh Prince looked at the little white cat that jumped out. He knew that it wasn't an ordinary cat. It should be of the same species as Little Green that he picked up. He stretched out his hand and didn't stand on ceremony. He pulled the little white cat's ear domineeringly and looked left and right. The little white cat's expression changed. Where did this brat come from? Yuan Ming laughed unkindly. That's why it said that pets shouldn't come out blindly. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Why do you want me to ask the person in charge of the battle spirit forces? Phantom beasts shouldn't stay in the academy. No one has the right to bring them out of the forest of Xuanhuan. Even if the battle spirit forces want to do this, they have to go through many considerations. This is because phantom beasts are different from ordinary demonic beasts. They are absolutely dangerous demonic beasts. If they're not careful, they might cause trouble. Therefore, no one wants to bring them out of the forest of Xuanhuan, unless the person wants to cause chaos in the world. As the descendant of the White Fin clan, the prince of the Cat clan knew more about beasts than anyone else. But it was because of this that Hellion Vivian frowned. You're saying that this isn't a test by the battle spirit forces? Not necessarily. Little White's voice was cold. I think there's a loophole in this. Hellion Vivian's eyes flickered. I know. Bang! A different sound came from the other side. Little White retracted her gaze. It should be a test by the other people. Ask them if they encountered phantom beasts like you. Okay. When Hellion Wei Wei lifted the little one up, she saw a few other people walking toward them. They seemed to have just gotten rid of the trouble they had caused. Some of them did not look good, but some of them did not show any change in their expressions. For example, Han Yu. For example, Yun Biluo. When this person was in the same group, she fully demonstrated the combat power that couldn't be expressed with words. Those who didn't perform well in the test were already tired. When they saw Hellion Vivian, they didn't say anything. They probably knew about her ability, so they weren't worried and walked over proudly. Hellion Vivian stood aside and raised her eyebrows. When it was Han Yu's turn, she pretended to hold his arm casually. Han Yu looked at her and said proudly, "What? Don't you know that men and women shouldn't touch each other?" Chapter 311. Don't worry. I won't have any thoughts about you just because of your face. Hellion Vivian smiled. Han Yu was furious. Tell me what's wrong with my face. You're as beautiful as a flower. Hellion Vivian sighed. Too beautiful. Han Yu's mouth twitched. He snorted. I'm good at both men and women. What do you know? Tell me, why are you looking for me? Why are you being so mysterious? What was the content of your test just now? Hellion Wei Wei lowered her voice a little. Han Yu glanced at her. A small whirlwind beast came. Why? Yours wasn't a whirlwind beast. A small whirlwind beast. Hellion Wei Wei's eyes narrowed. Wasn't the difference in the standards of this test a bit too big? Maybe Xiao Bai was right. There was a loophole in the test. But she didn't know how big the loophole was. Unless there was one in the battle spirit forces, Hellion Vivian clenched her fists. She didn't show it on her face. She smiled. Mine is the same. I'm just asking you out of concern. Concern. Han Yu laughed evilly. Then, he reached out his arm and placed it on Helian Wei Wei's shoulder. With a devilish smile, he said, "How can someone of your level be considered as caring? You're not sincere at all." The little seventh prince glanced at Han Yu's hand. Without wasting any time, he threw a long rod over. Han Yu was so shocked that he dodged to the side. He turned around and looked at the little one who was full of vigor. Little seventh prince didn't say anything. He picked up the stick and started the second round of attack. Han Yu dodged and shouted, "Little seventh, are you crazy? How dare you flirt with third aunt? You should be beheaded." The little one paused and raised the wooden stick that he had just taken out from the underground palace. Then, with a flick of his finger, a huge net flew towards Han Yu and enveloped him. Han Yu didn't expect this move. He tripped and his big body was trapped in the net. "Hey, little seventh, let me go if you dare. Let's fight one-on-one without martial arts. I've already defeated you. Why should I fight you one-on-one?" The little one looked down at him from above. Then, he stepped on Han Yu's head and stomped on it twice. He muttered, "How dare you flirt with third aunt? How dare you flirt with third aunt?" Han Yu howled, "My head." The overbearing little seventh prince completely ignored him and directly dragged him by his feet. Then, he threw the other end of the net onto the tree branch. Then, he jumped up, grabbed the net with all his strength, and fell down again. Han Yu was hung upside down from the tree branch. Little seventh prince propped up a large rock with one hand and pulled the net rope to the top. He was done. Yun Biluo looked at the scene. No one knew what she was thinking, but one could vaguely see that her eyes were a little heavy. "It seems that you all have already passed the first round of tests, and you all seem to be getting along quite well." Tu Su Feng walked out from the place he had just disappeared from, and the corners of his mouth carried a faint smile. The corner of Han Yu's eyes twitched as he was hung upside down on the tree. "How did you find out that we're getting along quite well? Little Seven is a violent person, he didn't even care." Tu Su Feng seemed to have seen through Han Yu's thoughts. He let out a long sigh and said, "Little Seven, put Master Han down." As he spoke, he looked at Helian Vivian and the rest. "You all can rest early today. Follow me, there's a shortcut in the underground passage." Helian Vivian thought. "Why didn't you say this earlier?" Therefore, all the new students followed Tu Su Feng into the bushes. Only Han Yu was dragged in by little seventh prince using the net rope. Little seventh prince's posture of dragging people was very domineering. He held a meat bun in one hand and an adult man in the other. The scene was so shocking that one did not know whether to laugh or cry. The underground passage was very long. If Tu Su Feng did not lead them, none of them could guarantee that they would not get lost. Helian Vivian did not tell Tu Su Feng the content of the test just now because it was not suitable to talk about it in front of so many people. She was just thinking about something else. Miss Vivian and little seventh prince are really close. Yun Biluo walked up to them without them noticing. Her voice was soft and calm, but there was an indescribable smile in it. Helian Vivian turned her face away. She did not say anything, but just raised her lips with a lazy and mocking smile. Yun Biluo narrowed her eyes and laughed again. "I wonder what Miss Vivian can teach me. I only know His Highness habits. I want to get close to little seventh prince, but I don't know how to do it. After all, children are different from adults. Although they are all brothers, little seventh prince seems to like to eat more." Helian Vivian never liked to deal with people like her who hid needles in their words. People like her usually had two meanings in their words. Just like now, Yun Biluo wanted to tell her how familiar she was with Baligaju. This kind of jealousy drama. She disdained to fight, but it did not mean that she would back down. How could she not return the favor when someone came to her door? Hellion Wei Wei curled her thin lips and looked at Yun Biluo meaningfully. Then, she said casually, I'm his third sister-in-law, of course, he'll be close to me. I guess Miss Yun can't do that, so I don't have any experience to impart to you. Yun Biluo was stunned. Yuan Ming, who was listening at the side, was somewhat gloating. I reckon that after hearing your words, her heart will be stifled for the entire day. Woman, you are too vicious. You clearly know that she is aiming for the position of third princess consort, yet you still clearly tell her that she can't do it. I am a gentle person, I can't always fight and kill. Why can't I talk nicely when I can solve the problem by talking nicely? Hellion Vivian adjusted her collar casually and continued to walk forward. Yun Biluo looked at the back of the figure, holding the handkerchief in her hand for a while before she started walking. However, in the next moment, a transparent stone wall suddenly appeared in front of Hellion Vivian, isolating them from Tusu Feng completely. Hellion Vivian recalled what Tusu Feng told them when they entered the underground palace, your test will come at any time. Isn't that a little too timely? Is it really not decided by the dean's mood? Separated by the transparent stone wall, Hellion Vivian and Tusu Feng looked at each other. Then, they turned around and their first reaction was to carry the tiger-faced little one. Han Yu also realized that something was wrong, his brown eyes narrowed slightly. On the other side, two people were panicking. They pointed at the stone dragon head at the side, look at this. Chapter 312. Looking across the row, there were more than 10 faucets with water flowing. The water flow was not rapid but it was suffocating. Especially when they were surrounded by walls, once they came into contact with water, they would not be far from death. In just a blink of an eye, the water had already reached their calves. Normally, when the water flow was rapid, once it reached the waist, it would be 2 to 3 times more difficult for a human to breathe. When Hellion Vivian was on a mission, she was most worried about encountering such a situation. It would be fine if she was alone, but now she was carrying little bald head in her hand. It was not hard to imagine that this sudden test would not be easy to pass. Most importantly, none of them were prepared. They thought that since the first test had just ended, the second test would come a day later. No one would have thought that in less than the time for half an incense stick to burn, there would be a second test. Hellion Vivian knew that this was Tusu Feng's way of testing their ability to react on the spot when their bodies were extremely tired and their minds were relaxed. However, she did not expect that Tusu Feng would go all out with little Seven around. Go back. Yun Biluo reacted immediately. However, it was obviously too late. The amount of water from the dozens of faucets was far beyond their expectations. However, in the next moment, the water in the dark tunnel gushed up to their waist. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes and placed little Seven on a higher spot so that he would not be washed away by the water flow. Han Yu had just untied the net and when he popped his head out, the water had already reached his neck. Everyone was swimming back crazily. When people were about to die, their first reaction was to register for the test. No one was an exception. Third Ant. The little one did not know how to swim. He frowned and struggled to ask Hellion Vivian, if there are fishes in the water, I can still live a little longer. Hellion Vivian was speechless. What did this have to do with the presence of fishes? She really did not understand foodies. You guys, cough, hurry up and leave. Han Yu started to spit out bubbles as he spoke. Hellion Vivian did not speak anymore because the water had reached her eyes. At this moment, the most important thing for people was to maintain their strength. Logically speaking, this was actually a test. That meant that there must be a way out. But that method was definitely not going back. Because if they walked back, Hellion Vivian was not in the mood to think. She could feel that her brain was a little bloated. This was the basic reaction of a human being underwater. Gradually, nothing could be seen in the dark tunnel except for the water. The only thing worth rejoicing about was that the water was very clear, and there was another night pearl in the dark tunnel. However, to keep one's eyes open for an extended period of time was simply a form of torture. Little Seven didn't know how to swim, so she wasn't suited to stay underwater for long. Helene Vivian gritted her teeth and tried to pull him back. But at this moment, the person who had already walked to the exit swam back. While underwater, he knocked on the wall with all his might, as though he was trying to find an exit. Yun Biluo's situation was the best. She had raised all the martial chi in her body, and the martial chi was hovering around her, giving her a short time to catch her breath. When the others saw her like this, they also began to follow her example and began to increase the martial chi in their entire body. This method was indeed effective for the time being, but it had a sense of fatality. That was, after using this method, those who lacked martial chi would lose all their strength. Help! There was already a person who couldn't take it anymore. The faint light on his body began to fade, and he desperately reached out his hand. Helene Vivian didn't have the energy to care about the others. She only dragged the little one. She narrowed her eyes and focused her gaze on the only place that was different. That transparent stone wall. There was no time to look for any mechanism, so she might as well make her move. With my life, I command the winds and clouds of the world. Helene Vivian suddenly straightened her body in the water. She hugged little Seven with her left hand, and slowly exerted force with her right hand. An invisible water current surged into her palm. No one noticed, except for Yuan Ming. This woman had once again broken through his understanding of human beings. Bang! Along with the strong water current, Helene Vivian punched the transparent stone wall. A cracking sound was heard. In an instant, layers of cracks appeared on the stone wall. Tu Su Feng was still looking at her with a gentle smile, but the instructor behind Tu Su Feng frowned heavily. Bang! She punched again. The stone wall shattered. Water gushed out. Tu Su Feng took a big step back. The rest of the water quickly flowed out from the original underground drainage pipe. There were indeed mechanisms everywhere. Helene Vivian's long black hair was wet. Her first reaction was not to question Tu Su Feng, but to bend down to check little Seven's eyes. Then, she pressed twice on his chest. Her action was very fast and professional. Even Tu Su Feng revealed a slightly astonished expression. Just as the little one spat out 3 mouthfuls of water, the others came out one after another. Yun Biluo, on the other hand, was not as flustered as before. However, this sudden situation made her lose her composure as she was before. The other two were even more uncomfortable. After they came out, they kept coughing. Their eyes were red, and they laid on the ground weakly. Even Han Yu was supporting himself with one leg, his handsome face showing fatigue. Congratulations, all of you are still alive. Tu Su Feng walked over. Sometimes, we have to face unexpected dangers. When you go out to carry out orders, no one can guarantee your safety. So, the first lesson of joining the battle spirit forces is to learn how to survive. As he spoke, he looked at Yun Biluo. Yun Biluo reacted quickly and thought of using martial chi as a defense. That's a good idea. However, I don't recommend everyone to use martial chi as support is too exhausting. Compared to that, I'd rather see everyone be observant. There's an escape button on your left-hand side. You should all go back. It's a waste of time to go back. Moreover, when you're killing the enemy, no one will give you any chance to turn back. Tu Su Feng's gaze fell on Helene Vivian. The reward this time is yours. There was no need for any explanation because it was Helene Vivian who broke the wall. Hanyu recovered and came over curiously. Hey, woman, how did you find out that there was something wrong with the wall? It's impossible to go back using the elimination method and reverse thinking. This is a test. If you were the one who came up with the questions, you would also seal the way in. There are always traps in the secret passage. Usually, the materials used to set up the traps are not that solid, so it's definitely easier to break through than other places, Hellion Vivian explained easily, but not everyone could react like that. Tusu Feng looked at her with admiration. The other instructor furrowed his brows even tighter. Chapter 313. How could a freshman who had just entered the academy know so many things? Besides, wasn't she the legendary trash in the capital? Although she won the first place in the martial chi competition, her reaction just now did not seem like a freshman who knew nothing. Of course, Tusu Feng was aware of this. He looked over and said with a gentle voice, "Don't worry, little Seven is fine." He knew what Hellion Vivian was worried about. Then, he explained, this child has been afraid of water since he was young. Juve saw this and went to the deep sea to get him a dragon pill. Dragon pill, the inner core of the divine dragon. Not only could it improve one's martial chi cultivation, it could also be used as a lifesaver underwater. As long as the person was fished out within a certain period of time, even if he drowned, his internal organs would not be damaged. He could still be alive and kicking as long as the water was discharged in time. However, looking at little Seven's listless face, one could tell how much he hated the bottom of the sea. He blew 2 bubbles in a row and said unhappily, "There's no fish." How can there be fish in the secret passage? Tusu Feng was having a headache again. Little Seven curled his lips and said to Hellion Vivian, "Dragon pill is not as delicious as dragon meat." "You've eaten dragon meat?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and bent down to brush away the little one's wet black hair. Little Seven nodded. At that time, third brother dragged a dragon back. "I ate it for many days. The meat was so delicious." Dragged a dragon back, dragged a dragon back. A picture appeared in everyone's eyes. The cold and noble third prince with his long sleeves fluttering in the wind dragged a dragon from the deep sea and stepped onto the land. Behind him, thousands of splashes rose up, but no one could do anything to him. As expected of His Highness, Yun Biluo smiled and turned to look into Hellion Vivian's eyes. Hellion Vivian didn't pay attention to her. She very handsomely brushed the black hair on her forehead to the back, revealing that melon seed-sized face. She was thinking that this matter was indeed in line with His Highness' way of doing things. Not only did he destroy someone's nest, he even arrogantly dragged them out of the sea and arrogantly dragged them all the way home. Even if he had a fire Qilin as a mount, he couldn't be so arrogant. How was he going to mingle in the deep sea realm in the future? He would definitely be hacked to death at any moment. When Hanyu heard about Beligaju, his first reaction was to scoff. Tusu Feng glanced at the burning sandalwood beside his hand. "It'll be dawn soon. This time, you can really go back and sleep. Of course, the test isn't over yet. I'm looking forward to your next performance." When everyone heard this, they finally heaved a sigh of relief. One by one, they dragged their tired bodies and walked towards their respective courtyards. Ding! Hellion Wei waited until everyone had dispersed and left before calling out to Tusu Feng. Tusu Feng turned around with a smile on his face. "Why? Do you have any doubts?" Hellion Vivian held the little one's hand and walked over. "I want to ask about the first test. Did everyone challenge the whirlwind beast?" "Yes." Tusu Feng's voice was gentle. "The test starts from easy to difficult. That way, you can gradually get used to it." Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. But little Seven and I didn't encounter the whirlwind beast just now. It was the demon-transforming beast. Demon-transforming beast. Tu Su Feng frowned. This kind of demonic beast won't be used in the test. Even in the future, we won't let you come into contact with this kind of demonic beast that isn't easy to control. There must be something wrong somewhere. Hellion Vivian smiled. I also think that this kind of demonic beast shouldn't appear in the academy, especially in the test of the battle spirit forces. She made it clear. Someone as smart as Tu Su Feng understood what she meant. His eyes darkened. I'll investigate this matter. There can't be any problems within the battle spirit forces. The night was getting lighter. When the sun rose from the east, one's mind would be muddled. In the jagged bushes, a demon-transforming beast leaned on the man's leg, trembling in fear. Master. What happened? Did you fail the mission? The man glanced at it and put the chess piece in his hand on the chessboard. Master, you're so resourceful. The demon-transforming beast flattered and said carefully, that woman is a little weird, but I can't tell why. But she killed my brother. I won't let her go easily. Then. Swoosh. Before the demon-transforming beast could finish its sentence, it was stunned by a chess piece flying toward it. Master, did I ask you to hurt her? The man stood up, and his black eyes were slowly dyed with light. The demon-transforming beast saw that he was staring at it coldly. That look was like a poisonous snake that wouldn't allow anyone to say another word. The demon-transforming beast was so scared that its face changed. Its black claws didn't even dare to move. In the boundless dark night, only the man's gem-like eyes could be seen. Find all the demon-transforming beasts. Since one or two of them have no effect on her, a group of them should have some effect. Soon, the White Academy will let the students learn how to summon their own sacred beasts. We should make our move then. What about Miss Yun? The demon-transforming beast stretched out its claws. The man quietly put the chess piece where it should be. She has her own things to do. Also, tell her that she can get Beligaju, but don't ruin my plan. Yes. The demon-transforming beast's black shadow fell on the ground. But if we leave the forest of fantasy in large numbers, the battle spirit forces will soon notice the problem. By then, the royal family will hunt us down. The man put the chess piece aside. The royal family will be dealt with by the 4 influential families. What are you afraid of? But the third prince of the royal family has Fire Qilin by his side. If it appears, none of us will be able to escape. Besides, the demon-transforming beast seemed to have recalled something and was very frightened. Master, have you forgotten that we were defeated by that person when you were young? That's why, Paw. The black chess piece was put down. The man raised his head. Under the moonlight, only his well-defined chin could be seen. Don't forget that I was not awake at that time. Besides, Yun Biluo can control him now. That's right. The demon-transforming beast's eyes lit up. Its black shadow fell. Master, you're right. I'm being too careful. I'll go and summon them all now. The man nodded. The silent darkness was like an invisible hand that quietly swallowed up everything. If you're right, we'll create an award next month and share it with everyone. What do you think? WeChat Red Packet. Chapter 314. In the dark tunnel, the water receded. Tu Sufeng stood at one side of the stone wall, and on his right side stood another teacher as well. Lao Bai, do you still think that she hasn't joined the battle spirit forces? Tu Sufeng traced the broken stone wall with his finger. This stone wall can't be broken by just anyone. She has secrets that we don't know. The teacher named Lao Bai didn't change his expression, but laughed. This girl is a little out of my expectations. But the test has just begun, let's wait and see. What do you think? Tu Sufing lowered his eyes. You're right. The test has just begun, but we need to investigate the battle spirit forces internally. Internal investigation. Lao Bai frowned. Why? Tu Sufing retracted his gaze. Someone used our first test to release the demon-transforming beast into the academy, and I just received a piece of news. Lao Bai's expression changed when he heard the words demon-transforming beast. What news? Someone is killing a large number of sacred beasts. Tu Sufing looked up. This must be reported to the retired emperor. Lao Bai's thick eyebrows furrowed even tighter. Don't forget, the battle spirit forces can't get involved in the competition between the 4 great clans and the imperial family. This is a rule that has been set since the beginning. The reason why the battle spirit forces can exist for so long is because of their independence. Do you still remember what the old man said when he was alive? Tu Sufing glanced at him. The independence of the battle spirit forces comes from the fact that they are not affected by other forces. This matter should be dealt with accordingly. Then I don't understand why you want to tell the retired emperor and not the elders of the 4 families. With their cooperation, this matter should be handled better. Lao Bai's suggestion was very pertinent. However, Tu Sufeng had his own considerations. There are some things that I can't tell you now, but it's not appropriate to ask the 4 influential families for help this time. As he spoke, he paused and continued, also, the Hidden Army's military seal is in Helian Wei Wei's hands. What? This was what shocked Lao Bai the most. Almost everyone thought that the Hidden Army had disappeared with the defeat of the Helian family. How did this military seal appear in Helian Vivian's hands? Tu Sufeng's eyes were warm. Before the old man died, he said that the battle spirit forces, or the Hidden Army, would be able to lead the entire Hidden Army as long as the successor of the General Manor passed the test. Ever since the old man passed away, the Helian clan has fallen into a period of decline. We have always appeared in front of the world as the battle spirit army. Now that the military seal has appeared, the leaderless group of us can finally see the light of day again. Early in the morning, water droplets slid down the wide leaves. Qing Zhan stood in front of the door anxiously. She frowned as she looked at the sky that was getting brighter. She was usually very calm and didn't talk much. If she hadn't encountered something, she wouldn't have behaved like this. The main reason was that the Princess Consort had been missing since last night. In addition, His Highness had sent so many people to search the entire White Academy, but they still couldn't find the Princess Consort. According to His Highness's temperament, if he really found the Princess Consort, who knew how he would treat her? A gust of wind blew, rustling the branches. The green bamboo forest swayed with the wind. The sunlight shone on the sandalwood table, and the red rose petals were like sweet blood. Every minute and every second was incomparably long. The man supported the table with one hand lazily, and the other hand played with the petals wantonly. His light-colored pupils emitted light, and he smiled coldly. She hasn't come back yet. None of the shadows dared to speak. Just yesterday, they were shocked by His Highness' anger to the point that their internal organs hurt. Beligaju held his chin elegantly, and the black tassels on his sleeve covered the mocking smile at the corner of his mouth. Tell me, if you can't even find a person, why should I keep you? Your Highness. Shadow suddenly opened his mouth. He wasn't worried about himself. What he was worried about was that since last night, the ruthlessness in his master's nature seemed to have been completely ignited. Retired Emperor once said that His Highness could do anything, but he must be stopped before his eyes turned red from killing. Otherwise, there would really be rivers of blood everywhere. What? The tone of Bailey Jiaju's voice was indifferent as he raised the teacup beside him and lightly shook it. The side of his devilishly pale face was indescribably charming and handsome. Shadow, in the end, your words can make me a little happier. Otherwise, get lost immediately. The last word, get lost, was said very coldly. Shadow knew better than anyone how many Shadow Guard's master had crippled in this one night. Shadow knelt on one knee on the ground, his forehead full of cold sweat. According to Princess Consort's temperament, she wouldn't just leave like this. She still hasn't taken back the Hellion family. Moreover, when Princess Consort left, it seemed like she had something to do. It didn't seem like she had completely left. Moreover, if Princess Consort left, she would definitely go find Hay family's second young master. However, she didn't go to the fine compound. Bailey Jiaju listened with his face turned sideways. No one could tell whether he was happy or angry. He narrowed his eyes and said, "You're right. She has been planning to leave the palace for a long time. She wouldn't be in such a hurry." As Beligaju spoke, there was no expression on his face. His left hand that was placed on the sandalwood table couldn't help but clench into an iron fist. He carefully supported the red roses in front of him, raising an ice-cold aura. With a bang. That bright as fire, the bouquet that symbolized thick warmth, quietly lay in the corner. Beligaju got up, one hand in his pocket, and arrogantly looked down at that expanse of red. His chest faintly felt somewhat blocked. If she could escape once, she could escape a second time. Even if he found her this time. Her heart was filled with another person. Bang! A fist punched the sandalwood table. Beligaju took a deep breath and raised his arrogant head. His long black hair set off his perfect ice-cold face, and as usual, he was elegant and bewitching. Nothing more than a prey. Better than her, prettier than her, more well-behaved than her. The noble third prince turned around and gradually disappeared behind the screen, faintly revealing a loneliness that made people unable to shift their gazes away. He took off his white outer robe as he walked, along with the white cloth wrapped around his hand, and casually threw it on the large bed. His eyes, as deep as the night, emitted a faint ice-cold aura, but also carried a loneliness that even he didn't understand. Fire Qilin was the person closest to him, so naturally, it could detect a little bit of his emotions. "Master, have you ever thought about it? Perhaps, to you, that woman isn't as simple as a prey." Beligaju's eyes were cold. "If she isn't a prey, then what is? You didn't treat your prey like this before." Fire Qilin stroked its handsome fur while muttering. For example, when he treated it, a whole month of vegetable leaves, did he think that he was feeding a dog? Even if he was feeding a dog, he wouldn't eat it. Chapter 315. Beligaju wrinkled his long eyebrows. "I find that the older you get, the more long-winded you become. Fire Qilin, who is this for? Isn't it because its master has never been in a relationship before? Ah! Love. Truly a troublesome little demoness. However, there is one thing that you are right about. This time, my methods are too gentle." As he spoke, Bailey Jiaju stood up from the wooden couch. The light in his eyes was slightly cold. His tall and slender figure was indescribably gentle like jade. However, that pair of eyes contained too much overbearingness. No matter what it is, it's right to hold it in your hands first. Yes. Fire Qilin respectfully bowed its head. Its fiery red beast form was faintly discernible behind Beligaju. The sun shone down. In the superior compound's attic, the little seventh prince slept on a wooden rope. In his arms was a big meat bun. That meant that when he was half asleep and bored, he could take a bite or two. Hellion Vivian sat in front of the window and lazily stretched. She held her chin as she thought about something. Her body was very tired, but her mind was very clear. Her lower abdomen still hurt, especially after coming out of the water. She kept falling down. Woman, your body isn't very good right now. I suggest that you stay by the third prince's side. Think about it, you still need at least, 3 times. That's right, 3 times. Yuanming devilishly hooked his lips. Little White transformed into the shape of a white cat and lazily paced on the ground. It was cold and arrogant. What 3 times? Yuanming's smile deepened. Of course it's dual cultivation. Dual cultivation. Little White's face froze. Its brows tightly knitted as it looked at Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian waved her hand. When the time comes, we will think of a way to solve it. There are still 16 days. Yuanming reminded her with a smile. Hellion Vivian unhurriedly nodded. That's why we need to solve everything in 16 days. As she spoke, she picked up the invitation that Tu Su Feng instructed someone to deliver. On it was clearly written that the third test would be held in the academy. At that time, all of the new students would be in the center of the courtyard and begin to learn how to contract with their own spirit beast. At that time, they would need to be prepared for the arrival of the test. He wondered what the content of the test would be. Hellion Vivian put away the invitation and looked at the color of the sky outside. It's about time. The students from the superior compound are also starting to head to the courtyard. Xiao Bai, go wake Xiao Qi up. We'll tidy up a bit and head to the courtyard. All right. Little White replied coldly. When she walked past Hellion Vivian, she added, the matter with the battle spirit forces won't be resolved so quickly. When you're looking for spirit beasts, keep an eye on them. If anything happens, bite your finger and summon me. Hellion Vivian nodded and narrowed her eyes. It seemed that even Little White had felt it. The White Academy's sky was about to change, rumble. A clap of thunder rang out. Large raindrops fell on the green stone tiles. The man held a folded umbrella and stood under the dim light as if he was waiting for someone. Yun Biluo, who was walking forward with the help of a maid, paused her steps and ordered the person beside her, you go somewhere else first. Yes, Miss Yun. The maid retreated quickly. Yun Biluo walked up and saw that there was no one around. Then, she knelt on one knee. Master. Get up. The man turned around. His well-made long sleeves were slightly rolled up. His slender fingers held the folded umbrella and sized her up. It seems that the cup on your body has been very obedient recently. Yun Biluo's body stiffened. Yes. So you don't plan to do what I asked you to do seriously? The man raised his head and looked at her. There was an evil aura at the corner of his mouth that did not match his face. Do you think that you'll have nothing to worry about once you've established a relationship with the Morong family? Biluo, you're too naive. As he spoke, the man's pupils shrank. Yun Biluo curled into a ball in pain. The sweat on her forehead overflowed. I didn't think so. It's just that it's too difficult to send a message to the palace now. The retired emperor is still there. That old thing has never liked me. If he knows that I'm still alive, he'll definitely kill me. It seems that you really don't know. The man looked at her lightly. Yun Biluo calmed the pain. Know what? Beligaju is in the White Academy. The man glanced at the noisy crowd nearby. Yun Biluo's face was filled with surprise. He's here. Why didn't He Zhu tell me? Of course, an ordinary death attendant wouldn't know. The man paused, his eyes gleaming. Besides, he won't tolerate a servant breaking the rules. If your sister doesn't show up tonight, she's probably dead. As he spoke, the man looked at Yun Biluo. Contact him directly. You know better than me what to do. Today, all the students from each courtyard will gather in the courtyard. You'll see him then." As he spoke, the man held up the umbrella again. He straightened his back and stood in a standard posture. His smile covered all the danger just now as he walked into the heavy rain. Yunbiluo suppressed the excitement from the bottom of her heart. Even her fingers were trembling. She was finally going to see him. His Highness, Yunbiluo walked forward. She believed that as long as she explained what happened back then, His Highness would definitely forgive her. Of course, even if he didn't forgive her, it was still understandable. After all, if it wasn't for her, the fire wouldn't have started. It was very likely that he would ignore her because of what happened back then. All these were within Yunbiluo's expectations. She didn't care about any setbacks. But she was really frightened by His Highness at that time. It was as if he had seen the soul snatcher emissary from hell. His glowing eyes, coupled with the blood on his face, made him look a little inhuman. Her first reaction was to run away. But now she regretted it. She had been with His Highness for so many years. Her food and clothes were much better than the rest of the maids. He had never let her suffer, although he was still young at that time. But she didn't know what went wrong that made him realize that she was hostile to the other maids. He didn't do anything to her, so naturally he wouldn't do anything to her. Because everyone knew that the royal family doted on her the most back then. But he refused to let her touch him. This was the most unbearable thing for Yunbiluo. It was as if she had never walked close to him even though they were so close. So she started to feel unsatisfied. She was older than him and knew more than him. She was unwilling to wait for so many years and then watch him take a concubine. So when the 4 great families came to her, she agreed. She never thought that the medicine would contain the cultivation dissipation powder. She never thought of harming him. She just wanted him too much. Chapter 316. Yunbiluo calmed down her emotions and walked towards the center of the courtyard. All the students from the 4 courtyards were gathered in the center of the courtyard. This reminded Helene Vivian of the time when she watched Harry Potter's movie, especially since they were going to contract the spirit beasts today. Every student was dressed in green and white robes, and they stood in their own courtyard in a square formation. The teachers stood at the front and explained in detail what to pay attention to. After all, even the spirit beasts would be aggressive if they were provoked. Hence, the beast taming technique became a big challenge at this time. Helene Vivian sent little Seven to the superior compound's courtyard first. Yunbiluo saw her as soon as she arrived. She smiled faintly and took a step forward, looking at Helene Vivian. Her voice was so soft that only the 2 of them could hear. "I heard that His Highness is in the White Academy." Helene Vivian stopped absent-mindedly and looked up slowly. Her voice was calm, and then, "There is nothing else." Yunbiluo was very polite and even had a smile on her face. This was where she was better than Helene Jiao. "I just want to know how much Miss Weiwei knows about His Highness." Helene Vivian looked at her. Her eyes were deep. At that moment, Yunbiluo thought that all her thoughts were seen through. It was a very bad feeling, just like when she was in front of the retired emperor. No matter how glamorous she was, the retired emperor only treated her as a servant girl and did not allow her to get close to His Highness. Yunbiluo lowered her eyes and continued, "He will treat anyone as his prey if he is interested in them. I think Qing Zhan must have told Miss Weiwei about my past with His Highness. I don't know if I am right. I did something wrong in the past and His Highness could not let it go. Now that I am back, I don't want to hurt Miss Weiwei, but His Highness will always have his choice." After that, she made way for Helene Vivian. She was so gentle, polite, and harmless. Helene Vivian raised her eyebrows and walked past her. Her lower abdomen was still hurting. She did not know what the test was about, but she was not in the mood to discuss these things with Yun Biluo. Furthermore, there was one thing that he had to admit. Beligaju did treat her like a prey woman. This Yun Biluo is not simple. Xiao Bai narrowed his eyes. I keep feeling that there's an indescribable aura on her. Be careful. Helian Wei Wei grunted and found a place to sit down. Yun Biluo looked at her from afar and smiled gently. In her heart, she never thought that Helian Vivian was a threat. Although His Highness married her, He Zhu also said that it was only to deal with the retired emperor. The other young ladies of the superior compound also thought this way. Therefore, when he saw the confrontation between Yun Biluo and Helian Vivian, even though Helian Vivian was now the third princess consort, he or she was on Yun Biluo's side. No, to be more precise, they were on the Helian Zhaoer side. When Helian Zhaoer introduced Yun Biluo to them, she said that this person's identity was not ordinary. A person who could make Helian Zhaoer treat her with respect might be a princess from some family. Compared to Helian Vivian, the third princess consort who could be kicked out at any time, of course, the words, not ordinary, were more useful to them. Sister Yun, some people are like this. They don't like to talk to beautiful people when they're ugly. The most terrible thing about this person is jealousy. Who says so? Sister Yun, you have to be more careful. Her identity is different from before. If she wants to scratch someone's face, the first person she will look for is Sister Yun. Sister Yun was brought in by the elders. She's not someone she can touch as she pleases. Sisters, let's not talk about that person anymore. We'll be summoning the spirit beasts later. Are you ready? Of course, but they won't be as powerful as those summoned by Sister Yun. Let's wait and see how Sister Yun will amaze everyone later. Yes, I think so too. The stronger one's martial chi is, the more powerful the spirit beasts they can summon. Those blast beasts bought in the market are no longer surprising. This time, I really hope to see a divine beast like the fire Qilin. A divine beast like the fire Qilin? Impossible, the fire Qilin is an ancient divine beast. No one can summon an ancient divine beast. That's not necessarily true. Maybe Sister Yun can do it. Sister Yun is not only good at martial chi, but she can also practice martial arts. Besides, she has the experience of summoning a divine beast before. She's different from some people. Of course, they knew who the some people were referring to. Although they could no longer mock Helian Vivian as they used to, they knew that even if she won the martial chi competition, she had never learned how to summon a divine beast since she was young. In addition, she did not have any martial chi flowing out of her body. The result was very likely to be the same as when she tapped on the crystal bowl. There was no movement at all. Helian Vivian naturally knew what they meant. Her thin lips curled into a smile. If those people looked closely, they would notice the mockery in it. She stood with her legs slightly crossed. Her posture was just like her, delicate and handsome from the inside out. When Jing Wushuang walked over, he saw this scene. Her figure was as gentle as jade. Naturally, those women could not continue being sarcastic. They quickly changed the topic and said that they were going to the temple to pray for peace for the people. Helian Zhaoer's eyes turned red when she talked about where people were suffering. The daughter of the Liang family held her hand and looked distressed. Even Yun Biluo frowned slightly and sighed. It seemed that compared to them, Helian Vivian was the evil person who had nothing to do with her. It was inevitable that it was funny. It was easy to save the people from the abyss of suffering. If they ate less bird's nest, they would have enough for an ordinary family's monthly living expenses. No one stipulated that one had to help the other. However, some people liked to do this. Who did not like to say things that made them look kind-hearted? The main reason was that Jing Wushuang's charm was there for all to see. He was indeed the peerless young master. Just by standing there, he was like a flower and a Bodhi tree. He was so charming. Many women were blushing. He just walked over and smiled gently at Helene Vivian. You didn't even attend the first class. The teacher called your name and said that he would teach you a lesson after seeing you. But, where have you been? Why are you so late? Helene Vivian was about to speak. A familiar cold voice came from behind. I also want to know where my sugar daddy went. Chapter 3:17. There was only one thought in Helene Vivian's mind. That would be, bad. She coughed softly before she turned around. Bailey Jia Ju had already strolled in. His long legs were long and slender, and he wore a fur cloak. Unexpectedly, he was dressed in an expensive black outfit. He looked like a noble young master from a painting. His sleeves were embroidered with floating clouds using black thread, and his silver button was buttoned. He had a grave and stern look that was different from the past. When one got closer, one could smell the residual smell of ice and snow on his body. Why aren't you talking? He looked at her condescendingly. The corners of his mouth were slightly raised, but there was an indescribable coldness in it. Who would have thought that the person who was as cold as an ice sculpture a moment ago would bend down in the next second as if there was no one around? His voice slid past her ears. Do you want me to deal with you now or later? Helene Vivian looked up at the man who stood up straight. His cloak was facing the golden morning light. It was cold and domineering, awe-inspiring and noble. Many ladies who were secretly watching him blushed. They could not help but look again and again. His godlike indifference was still the same. That kind of temperament that had been cultivated over the years and was used to controlling power was simply his unique edge. It should be easy for Yun Biluo to recognize him. As expected. Ever since Beligaju appeared, Yun Biluo was completely stunned. Yun Biluo was obviously stunned. She stared at Bailey Jia Ju with a lingering gaze. However, the teachers did not give her any chance to speak. They pushed up the reading glasses on their faces and announced, from now on, you will be in groups of 10 and start summoning your spirit beasts. Due to the relative danger of this lesson, the students from the superior compound will lead the students from the inferior compound while the students from the fine compound will lead the students from the good compound. According to your serial number, you will choose which group to stand in. Upon hearing that, Helene Vivian smiled. She looked up at Beligaju and said, why don't we line up first? Under the bright light, Bailey Jia Ju coldly looked at her. His eyes were deep and serene as he leaned on the side with an evil smile. That posture was so wanton and unrestrained. It was unknown whether it was a coincidence or not, but all the trees started to sway. Come with me, he said in a domineering tone that he had been used to for many years. She didn't like this feeling very much. That kind of indescribable pressure and urgency made her feel very uncomfortable. Most importantly, she hated being threatened. Helene Vivian glanced at Ning behind him. She didn't say anything and just walked over. Her idea was very simple. She would wait for him to finish sorting out his matters before coming back to talk to her. When she saw him rush out yesterday, she knew that Yun Biluo treated him differently. However, why was there still no result? Or perhaps he really wanted her to continue being Yun Biluo's shield. Helene Vivian narrowed her eyes and smiled coldly. The pain in her lower abdomen also made her less patient than usual. However, there was one thing she would never do. She would never be anyone's shield. Collaboration was one thing, but asking her to take a bullet for someone else. That's impossible. Helene Vivian walked forward without any intention of stopping. Beligaju's gaze became colder and colder. He clenched his fists under his long sleeves. The coldness in his eyes made even the teacher's scalp tingle when he walked over. The only one who dared to look at him directly was Jing Wuxuang. However, he just stood aside with no intention of interfering. He smiled gently. Beligaju turned around and looked at the teacher. The teacher thought that the student in front of him would strangle him to death in the next moment. Unexpectedly, Beligaju turned around and stood at his position according to the serial number. His eyes darkened as if he saw someone. Yun Biluo looked at Beligaju from afar through the crowd. She took a deep breath. Nothing could be rushed. Moreover, she could not ruin the master's plan. There was a bug in her body. Once she angered that man, she would only end up dead. Anyway, the master had said that as long as she could return to His Highness, he would remove the bug for her. She had to bear with it as long as she could kill two birds with one stone. Yun Biluo's eyes darkened and formed a circle with the people around her. On the other side, Beligaju and the little seventh prince formed a team from afar. The other people from the superior compound were always hostile to Beligaju, but they did not dare to provoke him. The little seventh prince was different. The little seventh prince was very excited. The way he expressed his excitement was very unique. His small body stood straight, and his expression was very serious. When the people at the side saw this, their faces were filled with shock. One had to know that their little senior brother was not usually like this. The little seventh prince did not care about the others, not even the teacher's explanation. He moved to Beligaju's side with his two thick legs. He lowered his black hair and said in a voice that only the two of them could hear, "Third brother, do you have any jerky with you? I'm hungry." "No." Beligaju's voice sounded colder than usual. The little seventh prince sensed danger and his eyebrows twitched. He was about to withdraw his short legs. "You go and change your sister-in-law to this team," Beligaju ordered in an indifferent voice. The little seventh prince looked at the team in the distance and then at his third brother's cold face. He bit his thumb and said, "Not this time." Beligaju raised his good-looking eyebrows. The little seventh prince put on a fierce face and whispered in Beligaju's ear, "The dean said that we have to follow the rules. Otherwise, the battle spirit forces will not give us the bonus. I'm in the same team with my third sister-in-law. I'm going to summon a big guy later." Battle spirit forces. Beligaju seemed to have thought of something. The coldness in his eyes faded a little. "You went to the battle spirit forces camp yesterday?" The little one nodded and told the story unhappily. "Yes, it was underground. I fell into the water, but there was not a single fish in the water. Fortunately, third sister-in-law saved me. Otherwise, I would have starved to death in the water." Shadow, it was indeed very cruel, but shouldn't one drown first after falling into the water? After listening to his little brother's explanation, Beligaju's face did not change at all. It was as if it was a matter of course. This made the little one feel more and more that a place without fish could not be called water at all. Also, we encountered a very cunning demonic beast. The dean said it was a test. The little seventh prince narrowed his tiger eyes. That demonic beast came out from underground. At first, it did not have a shape. It wanted to attack me and my third sister-in-law. My third sister-in-law killed one of them. The other one is now nowhere to be found." Fire Qilin heard this and suddenly said, "It's the demon-transforming beast. Master, someone must have entered the White Academy. It's not easy to summon these demonic beasts." You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.